Good evening. I'd like to open our call to order the Planning Board 16th meeting of fiscal year 25, our December 12th meeting. I'm Cheryl Tagayas, the secretary, and I am serving as chair for this meeting, and we'll have members and staff introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Jim.
Jim Davis, member.
Sean Fahey, member.
Maggie Oldfield, member.
And then Cheyenne.
Cheyenne Frazier, Assistant Director of Planning.
And Julia.
Julia Getman, clerk.
Okay, thank you. Our first administrative items are approval of the minutes. I sent some edits for the November 21st, but I have not yet reviewed the December 5th. Have you all had a chance to look at the edits for the 21st?
I'm good with the 21st, and I was not here for the 5th.
Same.
Same, right, okay.
I'm good.
All right, so then I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended for November 21st.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for November 21st as amended.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
There's no opposed and no abstentions, right? And then how about deferral of the December 5th minutes?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to defer the December 5th minutes to our next meeting.
Okay, which is next week?
Yep. Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sean?
Abstain.
Abstain, okay.
Oh, I should have abstained. From the 5th, I abstained.
We're
I should have
It's
abstained.
We're just moving
just
forward.
deferring
We're
it.
not. We're not
Yeah.
voting on them.
So that was 3 in favor of deferral and 1 abstention.
Well, you could call me. I'm in favor too.
All right, 4 in
We're
favor.
all in favor. Yeah.
4 in favor, unanimous.
It was my absence from the meeting that confused me.
Okay. Next is our next meeting dates are currently scheduled for next Thursday, which is December 19th. And then in the new year, January 6th and January 23rd. All right. Everyone still good with those dates? Okay, great.
23rd, got it.
Next, we'll move to citizen speak. Is there anyone in the room or on Zoom who would like to speak to an item that is not on the agenda this evening? And Cheyenne, will you let me know if you see someone raise their hand, please?
Yep, there's no one on Zoom.
Okay. No one. And then we're exactly at 7:05. Perfect. So we will open the continuation of the public hearing for 0 Blue Hill Ave, which is parcel B-7-5 site plan approval for the Gardner School. And welcome.
Thank you.
So you have submitted some revised design,
Yes.
I see. So you're going to run us through what you've done since our last meeting, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll run
great.
through a couple of things and then we can discuss everything we gave you and see if we can move it forward from there.
Great. Again, for the record, your name and
For the
association.
record, my name is Chris Basenden with Viking Development on behalf of the Gardner School.
Great.
Here to present the updated plan for you. If I could get promoted, I'll pull up some plans.
Okay. All right, 1 sec. So Cheyenne, can you?
Yeah, she.
Oh, is she doing that? Okay, great. Thank you. And then Cheyenne, if you could also promote Scott Thornton, please. Thank you.
Okay, so before we get into plans, just a couple of things. At our last meeting, there was a bit of an emphasis on that advisory submittal. And as you kind of alluded to, there's an ability there to shape a project for success in your town, and we appreciate that. We understand that. And hence, we went through, we evaluated kind of everything we talked about and identified some of those main ideas and feedback items that we thought we could incorporate and make this a better project. The submittal that we have today is not complete or not a full set of engineered drawings. It's more of a concept plan set, progress set to really show our intent and hopefully get us more feedback and ideas that we can go towards designing these into final form. Some of those ideas and feedback items that we kind of drew on There's four that we kind of keyed in on as we look back on the discussions we had. The first one was that elevation and visibility of the building from the road. We talked about height of the building, existing topo, those retaining walls. The second was just site layout strategy. We had talked about flipping building and parking. We talked about ramps, tiered parking, those types of items. Obviously, utilizing existing topo was a big one, and how we could kind of fit it into the surrounding landscape, and how that was a goal that you guys were working on your new site development plan bylaws. And then the last one was earthwork. While it wasn't maybe necessarily the focus, we talked a lot about volumes and disturbance and all of that. And it seemed like that was sort of a driving factor in the design we had put together. There was a lot of focus on balanced earthwork. I bring that up because in this redesign, we took that out of the main focus and tried to be efficient with other aspects, understanding that earthwork may not put us where we want to be. So updates wise, I think the biggest thing you'll notice right off the bat is the transition from a one-story building to a two-story building. That is not typical for us. And the reason for that is we serve kids 6 weeks to 5 years old. Kids under the age of 30 months are considered non-ambulatory. And so when you have a two-story building, a typical two-story building, that means the second floor operationally causes difficulties for us, right? There's no means of egress from a second story so non-ambulatory kids. It causes an issue. Well, in this case, we talking about existing topo and retaining walls, we saw an opportunity to kind of set it into the hillside a little bit and provide egress from both levels. And so that allowed us to kind of get past that operational challenge and make this work for the overall program that we offered. With the two-story building, we also get into footprint and location. By setting it into the hillside, using it as retaining, we got to flip that parking to the front. When we flipped that parking to the front, we saw the efficiency of taking that at-grade pond and putting it under the parking lot. When you do that, we really shrink our development area and our limit of disturbance even further. Just to give you some numbers, we went from 16,000 square feet to 8,000 square feet. The width of our building went from 146 to 132. The depth went from 114 down to 68. Doing all of that, we were able to distance the building away from Route 138 from 174 to 174 feet. It was 92, so almost double the distance away.
I'm sorry, what is the distance again now?
It was 92, and now we're 174.
Okay, thanks.
That's to the building. Got a little bit more distance from our north abutter, about 12 feet of extra space there, and then an extra 25 feet from the south abutter. So again, kind of two-story change, site layout change, really helped us sort of fit the building in, kind of reduce its overall visibility and presence in relation to that existing Route 138 right-of-way. I want to give a couple more numbers just related to disturbance, kind of showing you where we started and where we're at now, kind of the benefits of what we've put together. In the original design I brought to you, we were at 3.03 acres of disturbance. We're now down to 1.91. As part of all of this change, when we reduce that limit of disturbance, this design includes now a undisturbed vegetated buffer area between Blue Hill Ave and the parking lot. So most of those trees will remain, kind of screen us from the right-of-way.
Chris, can you just zoom in a little bit so we can see that plan, or the folks watching can see that a little bit? There you go. So that, and point to that area of
Yeah,
the
so all these trees in here. So at the pinch point, it's about 30 feet, and then as you move plan south, it grows to about 110 feet of undisturbed buffer area. Earthwork, we were at just under 21,000 cubic yards. We're just under 11,000 cubic yards now, so a 10,000 cubic yard reduction. That's in overall disturbance. Retaining walls, we were at about 1,100 linear feet. We're now down to about 290 linear feet. Majority of that is less than 6 feet in height at this point. And then the last item, slowly reducing number of trees impacted here. We started at 471. We're now down to 352. So high level, those are kind of the important key takeaways based on our last meeting, what the design's about today. Thank you. We have architect, engineer, traffic engineer all here for any technical questions.
Can you run through the revised drawing so folks who might be watching can have a look just as we have, since it's in our packets?
Sure. So looking at the site plan here, the shaded area is now our proposed two-story footprint. As you see, the parking lot here placed in front of it, I believe current plan is 46 spaces. In our previous plan, we were down to 45 spaces, so only one space change there. The overall access point remains here in the north edge, not too much of a change there. Playground's been relocated to the back of the building. As I mentioned, we kind of built it into the hillside, so the playground is accessible from the second level. And then you can see a meandering sidewalk there. That's kind of that egress I mentioned about having second level egress that opens us up operationally. Site layout wise, not too different from before in terms of trash enclosure and ADA spacing along that front edge. We have a couple retaining walls on the north and south end of the building. That's where we need egress from the lower level. Here's our grading, very similar concept, swales on each side of the site, kind of redirecting uphill drainage patterns. And then landscape-wise, you can see, I believe the number is about 91 proposed trees. We've added some along the northern property line in reviewing kind of site sections and visibility. We noticed a little bit of a bare area, so we felt we could plant that a little better to screen. On the site sections, what we did here was the new two-story concept on the exact same section cut compared to our old section on the one-story.
Can you zoom in show that top two sections and then the bottom two next? Okay, great. So I'm sorry, can you just explain a little bit the comparison on each of these sets of sections?
Yeah. So overall, the new concept has a finished floor elevation about 6 feet lower than the original. So it sits about 6 feet lower initially. As you can kind of see here, we've shifted the building back, roughly 100 feet or so. So we've set it down, we've moved it back, and now when you look at it, visibly in the rendering, you'll see it kind of sets into this side or the slope a little bit better.
So here, what you had before is the drawing on the bottom, and just above it is the revised design, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And again, just the top two, the same thing, right? So what that bottom one is previous design, and the top one is the current design.
Correct. Cut on the same section, same elevations, all of that. Next document submitted was just an updated earthwork calc. Shows our cut, fill quantities, and our net export, which I mentioned has increased a little bit, but overall not a massive increase from where we were before. So this is the site rendering taken from almost the exact same spot as previously. You can see a lot of the proposed trees. You can sort of see the retaining wall protruding out the sides there for the egress points. Tried to maintain the exact same tree line and vegetation behind the building as the original to help kind of give it the scale.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last item I have pulled up here is the updated traffic study.
Okay, so before we go to the traffic study, questions from the board?
I just had one. I do appreciate taking the floor plan of 16, condensing it to 8 and going 2 stories. I guess how does that affect your program with the back of the building having no natural light?
So it's not...
First floor.
Yeah, so it's not typically a problem, especially when you get into certain ages infants sleeping. There's a way we can strategically and operationally place rooms in the right spot, whether it's kitchen, whether it's an enrichment room, something where daylight isn't essential.
Mechanical closet,
Correct.
mechanical rooms,
Yeah.
and things.
Work
of that nature.
rooms.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So are you, I mean, we pushed you, I think, fairly hard to go look at another direction. I appreciate that you took a real strong effort at that. Are you feeling as if this is something that will work just as well as what you presented to us before? I guess is to Sean's question too. That the way that this design is presented now is something you're happy with, you would proceed with if you get the go-ahead to go forward.
Yeah. This, after giving it the thought of the egress and giving us the flexibility of 2 floors, it achieves the same as the original 1-story plan. 2-story plans, like I said, are not our preference. They also come with an added cost, elevators, stairs, those types of things. But we've overcome that, and I think we have made it a more efficient design.
You say costs go down, your building costs go up. Maggie or Jim, do you have questions?
No, I personally love it. I appreciate everything you've done. I mean, I feel that the topography and the land basically absorbs the building. I think you did a great job. I'm very happy to see no retaining walls. And I had sent around, I know I might be getting a little ahead of myself here, but I had sent around a question about natural stone walls. It's a sort of a veneer style fieldstone retaining wall. You said you've used them before?
Yeah.
And are you planning on using them here, or?
So we haven't gotten into that level of
Right, okay.
detail.
Sorry.
Given these ones are hidden, I don't know that we would go that route.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe something similar to just a small block that has a nice color hue to it.
Okay.
If it was exposed, like in the original one, I had submitted that product specifically in that original design.
Great. I'm very happy with what you did. Thank you.
So I too appreciate all the efforts, and I was wondering about how it's the grade, and I was thinking about like Cunningham School, where my kids went, and the first floor is partially it's under grade. Right. So I too was a little concerned about the light. But if you are at Cunningham at the front of the school with the playground sits a little bit low, and there are full windows that you can look straight into the first floor. They don't call it a basement. They call it the first floor. And when you walk up, you actually are walking up to Cunningham on the second floor. And then from the back, when you're going into the school, you're going in at the first underground level. So I do appreciate using the topography, and I think it's a much better look from 138. And reducing the size of the retaining walls, those 14-foot retaining walls were really an eyesore. So I think it's vastly improved.
Further comments, Sean?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think, Chris, you found a balance between our hopes and expectations and our role representing the town in creating a project that fits better, looks better, disturbs less, presents better. And if you find it operationally works, for the school, that's great. If you could explain a little bit, and maybe you might want to turn it over to your architectural representative. We talked a little bit too about the architecture of the building. Could you talk a little bit about what you hope to present in that regard?
I'm just going to let him start from the beginning.
Hi, again, for the record. Sorry, by the way, I apologize. I'm working through a cold. My name is Josh Helselsauer. I'm with Nor Architecture and Engineering. So I guess to kind of briefly talk about the architecture again, I know one of the points brought up about was kind of the prototypical design of the structure being, very brand specific. if you go on and look at some of the regions that we've focused on, whether it's the Denver area or Chicago, shape-wise, obviously you try to maintain some of the operational aspects of those buildings, but you really try to blend it in to what you're looking at. So in Denver, we found that a lot of things needed to be brick and certain tones to work out with that area. For Boston, one of the things that we found out, and well, Massachusetts area in general, but specifically Boston and even into Milton, there was a real, I'll say, dedication to lap siding that kind of took precedence over a lot of the materiality. So what you see here is mostly trying to bring that into context with, obviously a lot of the lap siding design comes from residential structures. So when you get into a larger facade like this, you do have to add a little bit of variability, which is where you see some of the different textures and direction of siding. But we took some of the inspiration from that, some of the inspiration from porticos and entrances on residential homes for this entrance here. And then obviously when you kind of change the footprint in this case, it allows you to have more of an elongated single slope roof that kind of acts like that salt box residential home that you can add a little bit of design to with the gabled shape. And then obviously one of the only other things here is there's a lot of residential homes just based on design. Milton kind of particularly, you look at the base condition of the house and obviously some of it was done for weather and materiality, sustainability, but the base, whether it's 6 inches or a foot, is kind of set up off the ground just to have that concrete or stone feel. And in that case, we brought it up a little bit more to act as a wainscot, but we tried to draw the materiality from a lot of your stone walls that appear on the sides of the roads and through the town. So we took some inspiration from that, as well as looking at some of the window design. Obviously, you gain a little bit of operation, sustainability, a little bit of climate efficiency from using the higher end commercial storefronts and glazing. But what it does offer you in this case is to use some different mutton designs you can see in the gray lap siding there that act more as that double hung look, as well as detailing some of the windows with some additional trim to give it that kind of old schoolhouse feel, if that's the kind of direction we decided to take it.
Are those windows going to be operational?
They are not operational.
None of them, the whole front?
Correct.
What is the height, the window heights on the second floor?
The window heights on the second floor, I believe it ends up being about 18 inches to 2 feet above the floor in most cases.
And top to bottom, the opening size, I guess
Overall.
is what I'm asking.
Of the size of the window, you mean?
Window, yeah, top to bottom of the window.
I believe they're about 6 feet.
So one thing I would say about the slope, the pitch of the roof in New England is generally a greater pitch on a lot of the buildings. So you've got a fairly flat kind of pitch. And I think I'm just curious, the head height of those windows being over 8 feet, maybe 8.5 feet at the header. Does that where your ceiling is, or is your ceiling like a 9-foot ceiling in these spaces?
The second floor, we're attempting to get a little bit higher operationally with us going to the 2-story design. That ends up being where some of our play areas are, the more open areas for enrichment and those sort of spaces. So the ceiling height ideally would be a little bit higher in that case. And I guess to speak to the pitch a little bit in this particular instance, I know you guys in zoning have a 35-foot height requirement. So one of the things we had to play with in this case was balancing operational height and structure with the building to also kind of maintain design and keep it under that requirement.
So the height is also measured from the mean grade, I believe, right? So you've got a lower height at the back and a greatest height at the front. So
Yeah.
what you measured there, is that taking that into consideration?
It is not in this case. We went with the worst case scenario,
Right.
just in case that was how you wanted to read it. We do have a little bit of flexibility. Obviously, there's construction variability and things like that, but I know the height of the building was a concern brought up, and I think part of it was just where it sat on grade. But we tried to be conscious of that in this design as well.
I don't know how other members feel, but I think having a greater pitch and having the ridge rise up a little bit based on what I just said about the mean grade, just appearance-wise, I think would be better. And the height of the building now, as compared to before too, is pushed back further, right? So the perception from the public way is it's further back. So that height will be perceived differently.
And we were just sort of
Yeah.
proceeding cautiously
Understood.
because, truth be told, this building still sits slightly higher than the old
Right.
ones. So
Okay.
I agree with you, Cheryl. I think it'll look better.
Yeah.
A higher ridge,
Yeah.
definitely. It almost looks, it doesn't look in scale
Right.
to the front wall of that building.
Right.
The ridge being too low.
We can certainly do that. I think in that case, obviously, we'll show you the elevations from the one-sided as well, just to make sure they align. But that would be one of the design considerations.
I happen to like your reference earlier was a schoolhouse type of look. I think you mentioned Cunningham earlier. In some ways, it reminds me of Cunningham with the height,
Right. Tall windows.
multiple story, the tall windows. It's
Well, the tall windows bring the daylight into the space, which is the way schools used to be designed.
right.
With those big tall windows, is to get the light in, the
Right,
depth
yeah.
of the space.
Yeah.
And I think proportionally colors, changing materials, all that seems fine with me. Just the pitch seems to be the one thing that seems too squat to me. But just overall, I'll comment too, overall on the new approach. It addresses the things that we were concerned about. I think it's a much better approach to the site. Sort of what I think comments that we made had to do with not having a cookie cutter that you bring in, and use somewhere else on the site that's a lot different than a flat site. So I'm really pleased that you took the time and effort to see how that could work for you. And I'm comfortable with you proceeding, to do the more complete package. I would like to talk a little bit about the landscape plan that you have, just so that we can, I think I'd like to have that just maybe thought about a little bit more along the parking lot. It seems to me there's just like a line of the same kind of plant material or tree material, right, following the edge of the parking lot. And I think if we could get that to be more varied, so we're not looking at a line, that it will de-emphasize the fact that that's a parking lot, right?
Okay.
So if you could give that some attention.
So changing in plant materials and depth as well.
Exactly, yeah, so that you have something that has, like what you might find different heights.
Yeah.
Like if that's all one height, it's just going to look like a wall, right?
Right.
So if it's something that's
create a layered look. So I wasn't at our last meeting, but I watched part of it, and you talked about landscaping, and Jim was concerned about the list of having trees and evergreens and shrubs, and you thought that could have been too much in one area. But this is where it's needed. Okay. So number one, the site of this is in the Blue Hills. And so we want to create a natural landscape, and it has evergreens, it has
Shade trees, the whole
it
deal,
has shrubs, all different layers. I would be concerned a little bit with some of the plant material because you might have a lot of deer up there. Mm-hmm. And even though green giant arborvitaes are deer resistant, they're not deer proof. So plan on possibly the bottom 6 feet, the deer grazing. I think 6 to 8 feet and not tall enough for starting for your plant material. I think you really have to be, 10 to 12 foot. It is still a commercial building. 6 to 8 feet is like homeowner grade. So I would go a little bit bigger than that. But the plant materials, seems, pretty good. It is a mix of all different shrubs. You have some natives. And, to Cheryl's point, it should be more natural looking, not like just a straight foundation planting along the street.
Yeah, understood. That layer that we're identifying along that parking lot was the initial go at screening it, headlight screening, all of that.
Yeah. And so maybe be thoughtful because we're running into a similar situation at another school with the residents across the street. So I'm not exactly sure where homeowners are located on the other side of 138, but really make sure when you're placing your siting your evergreens, really pay attention that it's blocking right into the windows of the neighbors across the street.
Sure.
So don't put a deciduous tree right in line with someone's window.
Thankfully, we have more room here too.
Yeah.
And existing
Right.
trees. So you might also look at some infill in there, lower infill, Maggie, like within the existing tree that's being preserved.
Yeah. So some people think less than 3-inch caliber trees are not worth saving, but really a cluster of less than 3-inch caliber trees create a natural hedge. So even though they might not have, financial value, a whole collection of trees provide a valuable space for the neighbors and also for wildlife. So really try not to just go in and clear cut to make your job easier, because we have another project in town where that's what they did. They clear cut everything. And it's just, it's really disgraceful. I know it's easier to do that, but really try to minimize. And just because, it's a 1-inch caliper tree, a collection of them does have value.
Absolutely. We can add notes to the plans as well to indicate protection of everything along limited disturbance line.
It would probably be nice to have a tree preservation plan, where particularly where you're getting right at the edge of your limits, like which trees you're going to try and keep and be mindful of their canopy and be realistic, and say, like what we've done with some is, here's the tree we're going to try and save, here's ones we're definitely going to save.
Right.
Knowing that line is a little, there's circles on the plan here, but exactly where that limit is versus the trees that are there.
Right.
Exactly. You see it right there, zoomed in. I really like the playground in the back, by the way. I think it's going to be much nicer for the kids to play in the back there. That sidewalk down is an accessible sidewalk. That's why it keeps its...
And that's a work in progress. We're looking at different options there.
Okay. All right. Other comments on these plans? I know there's going to be some additional. I do have a couple of things for you to think about with the lighting plan that you'll prepare. But anything else
mostly
on
I'd
these?
rather see bigger trees and fewer of them. It's not that much more expensive to go with a larger size if you're able to do fewer of them.
Sure.
And then especially the evergreens, they're the most important. I'm more concerned about the landscaping from the outside in. I'm not as concerned about what your foundation planting looks like, because the average Milton resident isn't going to be looking at that. So the less landscape there is probably less maintenance for the site anyway. And so I think you should concentrate all your efforts and plant dollars on the perimeters.
What about on that slope? It's a fairly steep slope, right, all around. in the front, but also in the back for slope stabilization, right? You don't show plant material. Are you planning for that to be like a grass or?
Yeah, I would
Have you thought
imagine
about
that
that?
would be blanketed and seeded, would be my guess.
Okay. Any thoughts about that, Maggie?
Well, maybe not even just using like Kentucky bluegrass. You know, you do a meadow mix, maybe a native meadow mix, because again, it would be less maintenance for you guys than a straight like grassy
Yeah,
where you'd
yeah.
have to mow.
Right. That's
There's
it.
definitely opportunity for us to pull from kind of the Blue Hills and that kind of historic aspect of it here for that as well.
Very natural landscape versus, a more, what I would call maybe suburban, kind of landscape approach. Okay, are we good on the landscape plan?
I just have one last question on the
Sure.
building. Will there be any equipment mounted on the roof?
There will be, yes. So currently, I will say that the sloped pitched roofs are not they're not fully gabled or hipped anywhere. They're going back about 3-4 feet just so that we can screen everything behind it, but still give the appearance of the pitch.
Okay.
And I know it's really not up to us about coloring, but I happen to like darker color buildings and they disappear rather than a white one. But it's your building, so I
No.
wouldn't want someone to tell me what to paint my
I'm with
house.
you on that.
But a darker,
It's all
Cool.
personal taste because I don't mind the lighter
know.
color.
yeah, I know.
I will say the more and more I drive through Boston suburbs, the more I see white side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of light. When you prepare the lighting plan, I'm going to switch gears then. Is that good? Since the parking's in the front now, I'd like for you to think about light fixtures that have pretty low pole heights and also dark sky compliant, of course, but ones that don't look too commercial in their style and design.
Okay.
So I think the last one that you had is pretty clean lined, but there are some which have a little more of a historic look to them that might fit with the kind of character of the building architecture as well.
Okay.
And if you need to, or if you'd like to see what we've done on a couple other projects for those that we've approved, the fixtures in particular, we can ask Cheyenne to pull those for you.
Okay.
But you're welcome to, select something else too. But my recollection in looking at what you had was a pretty
Yeah.
horizontal line. And, when that was in the back, that was a little different. But now it's kind of part of what you see coming up. And the height, just because, it's already elevated. So just from appearance from the street, these will be on, obviously, this time of year.
Yeah.
And then, of course, things like having it be on a time clock, so that they're not on longer than they need to be. Security lighting would be like occupancy type sensors, things like that. So we don't need the building lit up we don't want the building lit up
Right.
when it's not in use. And so that's something that we've looked at with the other daycare centers that have been approved recently.
And if possible, not sitting on a concrete footing.
Sure. Not having the.
And not,
it's
so
visible,
being raised up. So
Yeah, we'll work on locations to where maybe we can lower that to a very,
Yeah.
very small amount.
So are we ready to move to the traffic, the updated traffic?
Just before we move on, did any of the neighbors ask to see this plan, or have they seen it, or have they voiced an opinion on it, or I wonder.
I haven't been in contact and I haven't shared this update with them.
Okay.
Before we move to traffic, we can see if there's anyone who would like to speak. Cheyenne, are you seeing hands raised?
I see one hand. Lou Evelyn. I'll talk.
Hello.
Hello, your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, my name is Evelyn Castillo. I live at 711 Blue Hill. I
Okay.
believe that I'm the south abutter.
Okay, so we would move the plan a little bit
Yeah.
up here. Okay,
So I'm concerned because I don't know what this will look like from my living room window and when I walk out of my front door. While I appreciate the concern for the public way and public perception of the project, I'm wondering how it'll look to me who has to look at it every day. 124 feet seems really tall, especially if it'll be right next to me. I know someone mentioned that from Blue Hill, if people are driving by and it's pushed back, the perception will be that it's smaller, but this will be right next to me. So I'm wondering what the screening is going to be from my property. And in prior meetings, I know that it was mentioned that maybe the play area was going to be turf or maybe grass. I'm wondering if that's still going to be turf. And then how is this building going to look from my house?
so let's, I want to make a correction, Evelyn. The building will be no taller than 35 feet right now from its highest point. I think the 124 feet was how far it is from the property line. And the building is further away from the property line than it was in the prior scheme. And because it's tucked into the hill, I think you could go to the elevation maybe on the side, the south side, like give an idea. And then we can come back to the landscape plan. So this is cut away to show the whole building, but there's a retaining wall between the wall of the building so that they can get out that door. But the land would be sloping, following that slope that you see on the left there. So yeah, if you want to give an idea with that. Yeah, so there, exactly. So that's following the slope. So it's 1 story on the left side of this and 2 stories on the right. The 35 feet is what's allowed in the district and what's allowed in most of, I think all of Milton, 2.5 stories and 35 feet. So that's
Okay.
within the height
Definitely
limit.
more reasonable.
Sorry?
I said that's definitely more reasonable. I did
Yeah.
see 124 feet somewhere, but
I think that's the
don't know.
distance from the property line. Maybe that was, or maybe, you want to go ahead and explain that?
I think that's the topo, that's the true elevation.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's taking into account that you're not starting at 0, you're
Correct.
starting up higher. They're using the topographic elevation. Is that clear, Evelyn, what we're talking about with that? We can go to the section, you can show it there, what that means.
Yeah. So that's what I have
yes.
pulled up here, and you can
Okay.
see over on the right, finished floor 83. We have 665 at 102. Let's see if we have 711 here at 94. So plus or minus, your home sits about 11 feet above our first floor, about even with our second floor. And then this kind of gives you a rough relationship of your house to the development. There is a number of existing trees to remain, as well as additional plantings to help fill in any gaps.
So can you go to the landscape plan again for that, please?
So yeah, what we've done here, you can see the darker shaded trees would all be trees, shade trees and evergreens to fill in gaps and help with screening. From the angle at which the house sits, looking at our property and our development, it would almost appear as a 1-story building, given that you get a good view of the rear there.
And
Looking at our elevations, we don't change materials, we don't change the look. The front and back of the buildings look very similar.
so it looks to be about 45 feet from the property line to the do not disturb line in that part of where the home is. It gets closer towards Blue Hill Ave, but that portion,
Yeah, looks about halfway, 45, 50 feet.
So it's not as, it's about at the same grade as her house.
Correct.
So it's not sitting up higher from her house.
So based on that elevation, based on the sections and what's shown there, no. If we look at the topo, just to give you an idea, there is a little bit of a ramp up But I believe there's almost like a berm in between the two.
To get the drainage swale in.
Correct.
So that those V's are showing a drainage swale that would direct the water from left to right, right?
Correct.
And then further on the right, you can show where that ends up.
Yeah. So that'll ultimately tie into an existing swale that's already used today.
Okay. Does that answer your questions, Evelyn?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone else, Cheyenne?
Nope, that was it.
And there's no one else in the room. So I suggest we move to the traffic. Okay.
Scott, you want to
Okay,
take it away?
great. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. Scott Thornton with Vanessa Associates. And just a few brief, or just a brief update on what we've been doing the last month. So there was the comment letter that came from the town's peer review consultant that was dated October 29th, requesting that we collect new traffic counts due to the original counts being conducted at an off-peak time period in June and July. So we conducted those counts November 6th and 7th when schools were in session, provided a comment letter responding to the beta peer review comments. That was dated November 25th. We updated the analysis and provided this updated transportation impact assessment dated December 2024. In general, what we found was that the traffic volumes in June were, during the daily time period and the weekday morning peak hour period, they were about 2% higher than the November traffic volumes. During the weekday evening time period, the traffic volumes were comparable, so not much change there. In general, the project impact stayed about the same. In terms of operations at the intersections, generally looking at about a 1 to 2 second change in delay overall, whether it was the initial traffic study or this updated traffic study. We also did, we analyzed the 5-way intersection of Blue Hill Ave and Bradley and Atherton Street as a roundabout, as was requested by the peer reviewer. What we found was that, first off, DOT did not have plans for that design, for that roundabout. So we made some assumptions as to the size, roadway geometry. But what we found is that the roundabout actually operates better, which is not really surprising, with less delay than the signalized intersection that's currently in place. So where previously under the future no build and build conditions, we were looking at level service C overall at the intersection, with the roundabout, we're looking at level service B. So less delay overall, which again is not surprising, as that's one of the reasons for implementing roundabout control. In terms of overall, there's not really much change in operations or results or the conclusions shown in the original traffic study. We had also prepared a site distance exhibit as was requested by the peer review consultant. That's included in the appendix, and I think that's it. I mean, if there are any comments that have been provided by the peer review consultant on this update, we'll be happy to look at them or respond to them. But I think that's it for an update of the traffic situation.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Cheyenne, has this updated study been forwarded to the peer review engineers?
I believe it has, but if not, no, I believe it has. We had a couple of email exchanges over the last week.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cheyenne. And thanks to Cheyenne for having to fill 2 seats right now. We not trying to put you on the hot spot there, just trying to follow up and see where we are, Cheyenne.
My opinion is she's doing great.
Yes.
Really is.
Fantastic job.
Really. You're doing
Really
great,
stepping
Cheyenne.
up.
Really impressed.
Yeah, and she's due for a little trip coming up, which will be well deserved. Okay, I did have a question for you, Scott, and then we'll see what the other board members' questions are too. When you, in your profession, when you say not or a minor impact, when I was looking at the report and the counts were going up from an existing morning trip of just over 1,000, and then they were going up by 137. That I calculated that to be about a 13% increase, and then I think in the evening it was about 14%. I drove down. Yesterday was a pretty lousy day. The traffic is probably worse on a lousy day like that, but I did drive down Blue Hill Ave around 8:30 yesterday. And I was just trying to understand and think a little bit about making a left-hand turn, because I think your report had more people going north on Blue Hill Ave. And if you're coming out of this drive, you're going to be taking a left to go north, and you've got to cross the other percentage that are coming south. I think it was like 40-some% maybe going south. And it just made me wonder whether people are going to try and pull out because they can't otherwise get out. And if you had any comment about that.
In terms of
To
pulling
save-
out,
If there's anything
Just-
that can
just
be
taking a
done for
shorter gap?
safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to wait for a gap, right? But, behavior is such that if people don't, they wait a long time, or you say 1 or 2 seconds, but I think the wait is longer than that to pull out on that road.
And yeah, and I think that the more people are familiar with it, the more the more I guess the more of a measured approach they'll take to exiting or to pulling out. We're not saying that it's just a couple seconds. You're not going to pull up and there'll be a gap right there. I think maybe some cases there will be, but most people will have to wait. That is one thing that we noticed with the new counts before. We were looking at a level of service C for movements exiting the driveway on average, which was about 22 to 23 seconds per vehicle. And then with the updated counts, we're looking at a level of service D, or somewhere over 25 seconds, somewhere between 26 and 28 seconds. So I think there is going to be that type of delay that'll be typical, and people may structure their travel patterns to work with the traffic and not necessarily fight across the lanes of traffic to take maybe a shorter gap than would be prudent.
And did you look at the signals? This is between 2 traffic lights, right? The site
Yeah.
location. And so the timing of those signals, is that something that could be adjusted? Is that's a state decision, I guess, but I'm just wondering from a safety perspective if they ever look at these new uses coming in. I know the state is interested in moving traffic through Milton on these roadways, but these uses are not as safe if you don't have these pauses that traffic lights can provide.
Yeah, and I mean, it's possible that they would ask us to do something with the signal timing at Robin Street. Obviously, at the 5-way, they're looking at removing that signal. At least that's been discussed. It may be further off. Implementation of it may be further off because when we started, we were asking for comments. We heard about this plan, asked for comments, or asked for plan designs, and nothing was available. And 3 months later, still nothing was available. So maybe that's more of a long-term proposition. But I guess to answer your question, yeah, it is possible to set up the traffic signal timing so that gaps are created in one direction or another. In that case, the operations would be better at all the driveways and the minor street intersections between those two signals.
Is this something where you could go to the state and ask them about it? Or you said they could ask you, but what would prompt them to ask us?
So they would ask us if, or they would tell us really as part of the access permit process.
Okay. So when you go for the curb cut for the project.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I just have a couple, Scott, just on data. The data for your generated trips was Wednesday, Thursday. Are those the days of the week that you find most reflective of accurate data counts?
Yeah, generally Tuesday. We try to do counts Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay. In this case, was Wednesday, Thursday. Okay. And
Yep.
and your and this, I just need a little clarity on this. I probably am not following something here or missing something. So the generated trips are expected to be 137 during the morning, 131 during the evening peak hour, which would be 268 if you added them together. But on an average weekday, you note that approximately 399 vehicle trips are expected to enter and exit the site. Help me reconcile between the math of 137 and 131 being 268 and the 399.
Yeah, it's just that there's so the 268 is the total number of trips during those two peak hours, right?
Yeah.
And then over the daily basis or the daily time period, it's 798, so closer to 800. So what we're saying is that the majority of the traffic for the site is generated during those two peak hours, and then the rest of the trips would fall in between those time periods.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a question about roundabouts just generally, because I know that seems to be the trend, and I understand that a roundabout will help slow down and make the actual intersection a little bit safer. But are they really helpful for the rest of the road, especially for like this site, as Cheryl was talking about, but also for like the ladder streets and the neighbors? So, we have another site in town on Route 28 that the state is really pushing for the roundabout, and over 1,800 people signed a petition not to have a roundabout there, because even though it makes that actual intersection safer, it's going to cause problems all up and down Route 28. And I do think leaving this site, taking that left, is going to be very, very difficult for your clients. And I think if you can talk to the state, I don't know if they listen to you guys or not, because I don't think they listen to us, but to really put a gap in, because not only would it help this site, but it would help all the other neighbors too. So will they listen to you or take your suggestions?
Yeah, it's a good question related to the operations of the roundabout at this location and whether or not it's a benefit for all. Like you say, it definitely makes the intersection safer because it cuts down the number of conflict points so that, you don't have vehicles crossing, you don't have vehicles, going with the potential of passing each other directly. So it really does eliminate a lot of the types of accidents that can occur. And all the movements are restricted pretty much to right turns. So it improves safety from that perspective. As you mentioned, it improves safety by reducing the speeds. So people will be slowing down well in advance of the roundabout because they know that they have to negotiate that at it may be 15 miles an hour, maybe smaller or a lower speed.
But then they speed
But
up as they're exiting the roundabout to make up for the slowdown.
Yeah, I mean, right. So they could be. I mean, they should be slowing down on approach, slowing down through the intersection, slowing down exiting. And like I said, this one is kind of tough where we haven't really been able to get a lot of detailed information on the plan. So as I said, it may be a really long-term proposition. We can have the discussion. We can try to find out what the impetus is for the idea beyond just improving safety. I would say that if it's moved this far along in the planning phase, it's probably going to happen, and there's probably not much that can be done to retain the signal unless the funding doesn't materialize.
Well, one thing I would say is that there has been more constructed on Blue Hill Ave, maybe than when they first did their initial analysis. And, it's one thing to move cars along when there's no other uses on the roadways, but when you have these uses, I do think it is something for them to consider. So when you're speaking to them, maybe you could pass along our concerns.
Sure.
All right.
I just have a quick question for you, Scott. At the exit of your property, there's a stop sign. Well, how did you determine that you needed a stop sign there? Exiting the driveway? I think it was either recommended by the peer reviewer or you. I'm just curious why that would be there.
I think it's just prudent to have that for vehicle. It's really a recommendation just for safety purposes, so that because some people will say that if they enter some people could enter the right of way without slowing or without looking. So putting the stop sign and the stop bars there it's really just a typical procedure.
Yeah, now, personal note, when I was teaching my daughter to drive and we were coming out of Hawthorne Road, taking a right on Elliott, she didn't stop because there was no stop sign. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. If you think it's going to work, it's great. I was just surprised to see it in a driveway. And then making the curb cut wider to 24 feet, which I think is a great idea, and taking down a few trees for visibility. Was that a result of the sort of second traffic review that you did, or was that in there from the first?
I think that was in there from the beginning. I mean, the width of the driveway really is dictated by regulations and also by the path of the vehicles that are coming in. So if there's delivery vehicles or trash or refuse trucks that are coming in, we want to have them make as little cause as little drama to the traffic flow on Blue Hill Ave as possible, so that they can just pull in and pull out without any issues. And the width of the driveway helps them do that.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
That was a comment from fire at our pre-app meeting. They
Okay,
wanted
that's
to make
where it
sure they
came
had the
from.
maneuverability to not cross lines in and out.
Speaking of fire, this is not necessarily for Scott, but is this a sprinklered building and therefore they don't need access to the back side of the building here?
It is a fully sprinkled building, yes.
Okay. And you'll have another conversation with the fire chief
Correct.
with this
Yeah.
new site plan?
Fair point. Make sure we get hose pulls and everything to
Exactly,
the
yeah.
backside.
All right, so anything else, Jim?
I'm good.
Okay, anything else on the traffic? All right, so when do you think you'll be ready to come back to us, knowing that we have a meeting next week and then our next one is January 6th and then January 23rd after that,
So I'm thinking the 23rd.
the 23rd?
I think the 6th with the holidays is just going to be tough to finalize things.
Right.
That'll also maybe get us a little time to get the traffic peer review comments back.
Okay,
We have stormwater peer review comments back, but we'll obviously adjust with this design and go back again. So maybe by the 23rd, we have a little progress there as well.
okay. And Cheyenne, as far as the new public hearing for 10 Bassett, have we set a meeting date and time for that one?
Yes, they are coming back on the 6th of January.
Okay, so do we have anything else with a specific time on the 23rd?
No, not as of now.
All right, so then I'm going to suggest that we continue the hearing until the 23rd at 7:05, and I'll take a motion for that.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I
Thank you
appreciate
all.
it.
Yep.
Good.
Thank you, guys.
Happy
Thank you.
holidays to you.
Happy holidays.
Nice job.
Yeah, same to you.
Good job.
Okay, next on the agenda.
Sorry, we had skipped staff updates, so I wanted to hit that really quick before we had UTO come up.
Sorry, Cheyenne, I missed that.
No, you're good.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Sure. So the first one is the annual report is due January 24th. Julia has been working on a skeleton, so we'll get that into a folder to share out. As for future agenda items, we wanted to know if you want to add budget discussions. I know you wanted MAPC to come back in January for zoning, another public forum. So we didn't know if you wanted that on future agendas.
Okay. Did the budget get submitted in December? I know we had talked about that previously, and also a contingent budget. I think there was some discussion about what that could be.
I spoke to Amy. I think you have 50,000 in like planning board, and then like 1,000 or something in studies. We'll have to like confirm that studies, but you definitely have over 50,000 that you could pull from elsewhere. I reached out to Josh just to see like an estimate of what a public forum and a couple more meetings would be. I know Meredith said she wanted a couple more. So I'm waiting for him to get back on that.
Okay, so Cheyenne, I think did we schedule Josh to come back on the 6th?
Sorry, it's, yeah, planning board has 50K in it, and, wait, never mind. I'm looking at MPIC. I thought I had it here. Never mind, sorry.
Okay, so I know Cheyenne, you won't be available next week. So the next meeting after that would be the 6th. I thought that we had thought the MAPC would come back on that meeting. Is that right?
Yes, they're currently coming back on the 6th to talk more about the zoning. I know last meeting, Meredith wanted to extend it end of February, but I was talking to her this week and she's thinking end of March to include like a public forum and a couple more meetings. So that's why I reached out to him, just to see how much that would cost and if we had money in our budget for it.
So, and was she thinking that the public forum would have to do with the zoning language? and the design guidelines?
We didn't go that deep into it, but I think she wanted it kind of around the same time as town meeting,
All right.
just so that we would, or not like exactly around, but relatively.
All right. So, well, we can talk next week about, oh, just one last thing then. So is a contingent budget not being put forth for this coming year, fiscal year?
I don't know much about a contingent budget.
Okay.
I just know I spoke to Amy and she said this is what we had currently.
All right.
So I thought we talked about like $100,000.
I remember that.
But
too.
that was for contingent budget, so, all right, well, I think we'll definitely need to talk about that further. So as far as, have you worked with Meredith to set the agenda for next week, Cheyenne?
As of now, we just have Thayer Nursery coming up and the public hearing for all of our articles,
And then do we
but
have,
nothing official.
okay. All right, so I guess maybe you could reach out to her and see if budget discussion should be on next week's agenda. And
Okay.
In the event that we need to have some kind of discussion with MAPC before the 6th in terms of their budget, okay? Otherwise, I think other things can wait, I think. And their contract extension. I think Josh, when we asked him, he thought there was a little bit of budget left, but when he went back to look at it, I don't know what he found. So it would be good to know if you get a chance to follow up with him about that. Maybe let Meredith know what you find out before our
And also,
meeting
Yeah.
next week.
yeah, and find
I
out
believe we
if
have to take
the-
1,000 from somewhere else.
I still think we probably need more than 50,000. Like, I know 100 was on a contingent, but is there any way, and maybe this is a discussion for next week, but maybe we should be prepared to kind
Ask
of
for more.
advocate for more than 50.
Yeah, so we can try
Especially-
and get clarity
Yeah,
on that.
especially since we're not sure when,
MBTA communities.
yeah, we don't know what's coming ahead, or, you know, when Tim's replacement will be coming in, and if we have to hire consultants to
Right.
help us.
Okay. All right. I know that there was some discussion with the town administrator about consultant, you know, but I don't know how that works in terms of consultant fees compared to salary, you know, in the budget lines.
Yeah.
And that would be in a separate budget than the planning board budget. But I also thought that, I know Tim had been thinking about seeking planning department budget and sort of separate from planning board budget. And I don't know where that stands. So, yeah, well, thank you, Cheyenne, for bringing that up, and we'll need to have some discussion. So if you can ask Meredith about putting that on the agenda for next week, that would be great.
Definitely. Last thing is regarding ADUs. Building department would love to be working hand in hand with you guys. They were hoping next meeting or whatever meeting we touch on ADUs again, if we could invite the building commissioner, Joe.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea.
Why don't we talk about that also when we talk about ADU on the agenda? Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Now we will move to the agenda item 5, MBTA community zoning discussion with UTIL, and I see that we have Zoe and Matthew with us tonight. Welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you. And we also have JT from our team as well. So if you're able to promote him to panelist, if you haven't already, that would be great.
Okay, I see that he needs to be promoted.
Okay. Thanks so much. All right, I will go ahead and share screen. And let's do a quick check here. Okay. So just the usual kind of anchor in case we need it for reference to prior, to sort of the original 2023 warrant proposal sub-districts. What we have for you today is we're going to go through some research that we've done on the Elliott Street corridor minimum lot size after our conversation last time. We've also gone through the Elliott Street corridor kind of boundary and looked at, what might make sense as an expanded boundary if you were to, for instance, opt for the 6,000 square foot minimum lot size. That's something that we can sort of walk you through as a case study of expanding the boundary. And then we've run the numbers for kind of an overall adjustment to the numbers with the Elliott Street corridor refinements in mind, as well as the request from last time to return the Granite Ave North subdistrict to the level of density that it had in the 2023 warrant, and focus our reductions elsewhere. And then we'll close by showing a kind of a second pass at sort of looking at some of the alternative sub-districts that we discussed at our last meeting with you. And we can kind of talk through kind of next steps relative to that. So just sort of big picture, what we're looking at is kind of that next step of fine tuning to try and get the balance right between the East Milton sub-districts and Elliott Street corridor and sort of this other sub-districts, other sub-districts within the overall approach. So with that, this first piece, I'm going to mostly pass off to Matthew to walk you through some of the test fitting that we did. As a reminder, the goal here was to really look at this lowest tier, tier 1, which handles the smallest lots that are within the Elliott Street corridor. To jog your memory, in 2023, we settled on a minimum lot size of 7,500. We've been studying this year options to bring that lot size down, that minimum lot size down. And we've also increased the number of units that can be permitted in tiers 2 and 3 from 3 units to 4 units. We thought it would be helpful to bring back some of the visualizations that we did last year with some minor updates, as well as some new ones that look at these smaller lot sizes. So with that, I will pass to Matthew, I think, to kind of run through this piece.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Again, as we revisit and sort of fine tune the Elliott corridor, it was probably a good time to revisit some of the little testing that we had done previously and then see how that plays out at some of the different tiers that we're looking at right now. We're holding a lot of the basic setbacks and coverage and height, but we have been sort of tweaking the FAR to sort of limit the building massing to the sort of what the model is expecting in terms of a sort of maximum unit size. So if you go to the next slide.
So as a quick note, I forgot to mention that last time one of the focal points was the open space metric. So we've listed it in terms of max building and parking coverage. So the inverse, right, is open space. So 40% is the inverse. So we've been holding since 2023 that 40% metric for open space. And so that's part of what we were looking at in doing these test fits.
So again, this was the smallest. So this, again, tier 1 would apply for everything from a minimum, in this case, 5,000 square feet up to 10,000 square feet. We've drawn from a kind of similar existing parcel based on existing patterns and, basic sort of parcel dimensions. In this case, it's pretty typical 50 by 100 lot. Explored 2 scenarios. You may recall we're holding a kind of minimum side yard of 5 feet, but minimum total side yard left and right of 20 feet. So in the left-hand scenario, you see that both side yards are 10 feet. And in the right-hand side, you'll see it's 5 on one side and 15 on the other, which is not an uncommon kind of condition that we seem to have observed. You'll also see that the FAR here is at 0.6. So if you sort of do the math, it gives you a maximum building area of 3,000 square feet, which is the model will recognize as 3 units. So the screws have been tightened a little bit there. In this smallest scenario, we're hitting exactly that that building and parking paving coverage ratio of 60%. The next slide shows if we move it up to 6,000 square feet, again, drawing from a similar existing parcel, which also seems to exhibit that sort of slightly asymmetrical side yard condition. 2 scenarios here, one a little bit more parallel to the street, the other a little bit more perpendicular. And again, we've sort of nudged the FAR down in this case to sort of hit that 3,000 square foot of developable area inside of a 2.5-story volume. And the next slide is, I think, one that we probably saw earlier when we were looking at 7,500. These larger lots tend to not be much wider, just honestly a little bit deeper. So it plays out in a very similar way in terms of how it fronts. But again, in this case, you'll see that the FAR has been reduced yet again to max us out at 3,000 square feet if we're at that exact threshold. This is a sort of similar sized parcel, but of a different proportion to see again how that plays out. You know, similar outcomes in terms of building coverage and total building massing.
Excuse me, Matthew. In order for this to work out this way on the larger lots, are you limiting to the FAR to keep it at that 3,000 square feet?
So that's something we can kind of add in. So we had some FARs that we had worked. I think you had sort of helped us to arrive at those original FARs in the 2023 warrant through some analysis that you had done at that time. Mm-hmm. We're sort of reporting here like the minimum FAR that you can set that won't trip the model. So if we want to tighten it up, there's some room to do that if we choose to.
Okay.
And there are other parameters we can introduce, like maximum building footprint, you know, other things. But I see your question, right? So if you go up to, if you happen to have a 9,999 square foot parcel, obviously that fixed FAR is getting you more floor area. So, but there are other controls we can introduce if we really wanted to keep it down.
Well, I think it's something to pin and for discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Once we have kind of a minimum lot size that we feel good about, we can, you know, focus in on some of those other parameters that Matthew's talking about to make sure that, you know, it's producing something that you guys feel is a good match.
Because obviously and I think, here,
you know, the open space requirement in this case is doing a pretty good job at keeping that footprint tight.
Okay.
You don't want the option of a 1-story building that fills out that entire
exactly
dash red line. So that open space piece is, I think, doing a good job. But if it's a thing of concern, we can, you know, continue to drill down on other metrics that would control that. So that's the tier 1. And then this is a visualization. I think we may have shared this with you before. It happens to be on the 7,500 square foot deeper parcel, but again, that frontage is very similar to the frontage widths that we were looking at the 6,000 and 5,000. So it results in a similar building scale. You know, again, depicting setbacks, side yards that are we think fairly reasonable with respect to what a typical sort of condition is. The next tier is 10,000 square feet again. So this is between 10,000 and 15,000. and moving up to sort of 4 units per parcel maximum. If you go to the next slide, this opens up the possibility of having 4 units in one building or having 2 units in 2 buildings. That latter scenario meets the multifamily definition according to the law, the new law. And it's worth noting that it might be, if a developer had a blank site like this, they may elect to put it into 2 buildings to avoid sprinklers and all the things that come with the multifamily code that kicks in at 3 units. But the math sort of works out the same. Both of these are showing open space at 62%. And again, the FAR has been sort of calibrated to get us right to that 4,000 square foot total area, again, at 10,000 square feet. But if there were more lot area, obviously that FAR number produces something that's higher. This is a slightly different proportion site, and it seems to honestly sort of work fine. Again, you could have 1 building or even 2 buildings, even within that sort of 10-foot setback. And I believe in this larger one, we're holding a 10-foot setback. But again, that's a finer point. What kind of optionality we want on side yards is a finer point that we can continue to discuss. Next slide shows a sort of a visualization of this.
Right. I was forgetting about that.
Again, it's a little wider. It's a bigger site. But I continue to think that the 2.5 story limitation, if it's truly 2.5 stories, does a lot towards taming the character of a building that could potentially have 4 units in it.
Great. So I think with that, maybe we can pause before kind of proceeding to the next piece of work, just to hear any questions or comments you all have about this. I think the ultimate goal here is to see if we can get closer to deciding on a minimum lot size that feels comfortable for that smallest tier, the tier 1. And that kind of has a ripple effect in terms of other decisions. So we've made, for the sake of the presentation today, we've made a case study of the 6,000 square foot lot size as the minimum, but it would be great to hear your thoughts, having seen these test fits, of what that looks like on a typical lot at that scale. I'm happy to toggle back to any of these that you want to kind of spend a little bit more time with.
I think for me, the analysis is good at this point, and then it would be interesting to see, how many additional parcels this pulls in at 6, how many additional pulls in at 5, and then it'll be something which we'll want to get community feedback on. But as far as the analysis, I think the analysis is good. The question I had about the FAR, for those variable, because 5,000 to 7,500, at 5,000, you're getting the 1,000 square foot unit, but at 7,000, you're not, right? You're getting the bigger. So that's my thought. Anyone else?
No, I don't see much difference between the 5,000 and the 6,000, actually, the way it models out. I think they both look pretty good. And I'm with you. I would like to see the overall density of the area, the neighborhood.
Yeah, because we'll have to see, how many streets and how wide these streets are, and how many additional units it is. But as far as the analysis, I think at 3,000 square feet, it does meet the criteria we've said: 40% open space, the setbacks, and the heights, and so forth. So now it's beginning to put those all together. What does it look like, on a district-wide basis? And I think we're going to end up looking at options for that and having that neighborhood weigh in. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I don't really have any comments. I think I've said it the last meeting that I feel, before the SJC makes a ruling, I'm just sort of uncomfortable talking about it, out of respect for the judicial process. So I don't really have any comments at this point.
Okay, so we're ready to move on?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Matthew.
Great. So this next piece, this is mostly content that we had in the deck last time. There's just one bit of new content that kind of builds on it, but just so that it's fresh in people's mind, I'll kind of run through it. This is where we basically just did a mapping of those, how the parcel sizes interact with the boundary that we have. So as a reminder, we started in 2023, we have set this threshold at 7,500. What you're seeing here is in teal, or kind of blue, green, depending on how it's showing up on your screen with color. Those are the parcels that meet the 7,500 square foot threshold, so they are buildable under this zoning. The parcels that are showing us kind of a gold color or kind of a green, depending on your screen, those are parcels that are quite a bit larger, and that based on our kind of, understanding of how these numbers, interact with one another, those kinds of parcels will result in the density of your district overall for the Elliott Street corridor coming down. So those will have kind of a negative impact on the density for the district if we include a lot of parcels that are at that scale. It shouldn't be the driving decision, but it's an important thing to be weighing. And then the pink parcels are the ones that are smaller than the threshold and therefore will not be buildable under this zoning. So if you get if you get a lot of those pink parcels, that's going to start bringing your density down as well, because you have a lot of parcels that are included in the district but that cannot be built on under this zoning. So that's kind of just like to get you oriented. So what we're looking at, I think what you'd like to see is, as much as possible, you're seeing that kind of blue, cyan, teal color coming through, with more of those happening within the boundary that we're looking at. So you can see that 7,500, there's still quite a bit of the pink that's within the boundary. You get to 6,250, it's kind of good gains. You're seeing more of the blue. At 6,000, a little bit of additional gain from the 6,250, just to kind of toggle between those. That's kind of the gain there. And then lastly, once you hit the 5,000, you've got almost all of the parcels are eligible or buildable. So that's kind of, that represents kind of the pattern of the smallest lot sizes in this part of the town. It kind of aligns with that 5,000 number. But obviously those parcels are also smaller and might be appropriate for different kinds of buildings than what we're looking at. So this is kind of where we left it off last time that we spoke with you. What we've done this time around is we've taken the 6,000 square foot parcel size as a case study and looked at something that had been asked a little while back, which is, what if we were to expand the boundary a little bit for the Elliott Street corridor, see if we could, gain a little bit there in a way that made sense and was aligned with the sort of broader planning principles. So what we've done here is, as much as possible, trying to stick to kind of logical breaks in the pattern of the neighborhood in terms of streets alignments, in terms of distance to the transit stops. So what you're seeing is that 1,200 foot kind of radius around each of these stops. So we took that as kind of a proxy for like a comfortable walking distance for a lot of people. And then this is that half mile. So that's the distance that's relevant for the law. But this tighter radius was seemed like a strong planning starting point for the boundary logic. And then you'll also see that we're representing here the Milton Hill Historic District that's been on all of the maps up until this point. That's represented there because we want to kind of, as much as possible, limit the interaction between these two districts so that we're not creating conflicts. So we've shown here kind of the places where we think it could be logical from a planning perspective to make minor expansions of the boundary. And then we've used this to run some numbers just to show you, what the impact sort of in theory of expanding the Elliott Street corridor boundary would be on your compliance picture overall. So again, there's, obviously if we choose to do this, there's a lot of subtle decisions to be made, but we wanted to give you kind of the global impact of it. So with that in mind, these notes are mostly just for your reference if you're looking at the slides on your own without us. So I'm not going to walk through every piece of this, but what I did want to start with is showing you the Elliott Street corridor with the expanded boundary that I just showed you on that map, what that starts to look like in terms of numbers. So what I want to kind of call your attention to here is two things, and then I'll go into kind of the next level of detail. The first is the overall number of units that we're showing. This is using all the rules that we had talked about last time. So we've tightened up the FAR a little bit here to, more closely aligned with what would produce that, for instance, in the smallest tier, that 3,000 square foot building that would deliver you 3 units according to the compliance model. That's kind of getting it as tight as it can be while still, delivering the unit numbers that you need out of those parcels. So these parameters are unchanged from when we spoke last time. The thing that's changed is the area that it's being applied to. So it's being applied to a slightly larger area in each of these cases. So what that means is that because these are lower density districts in general, in comparison to the other districts that compose your overall set of MBTA communities sub-districts, increasing the acreage of this results in the density of your overall town-wide, set of districts coming down because there's a greater acreage at a lower density, and that's starting to skew the overall density numbers. And so if we kind of hold everything else constant, what that means is this scheme with that expanded Elliott Street corridor comes in below the 15 units per acre density threshold, and it's getting significantly more units than the number of units that were included in like the 2023 warrant, for example. So it's skewing the overall picture in a way that's not actually particularly helpful in terms of, trying to just stay very close to those compliance targets. So that's kind of the big picture, which we thought this might be the case, but we wanted to go through the exercise of actually testing it and seeing what the impact is. If the expansion of the Elliott Street corridor is a little bit smaller, the impact would be less dramatic, but this is kind of the basic logic that would be true no matter what degree of expansion you opt for, is that expanding the Elliott Street corridor will generally result in more units, lower density, and will start to kind of require you to put more units elsewhere in order to get that density back up. So I think the big message here is it probably doesn't make sense to expand the Elliott Street corridor much, if any. What does make sense is refining the parameters within it. And if there's any kind of, subtle, but important changes in the boundary to kind of make it feel more aligned with specific patterns that people observe in the neighborhood, things like that, that's absolutely something that we can do. But we should try and keep the acreage of it kind of close to where it is now and not increase that acreage too much.
So we have a question. I think, do you know how many parcels were in the district before and how many parcels were added in this analysis of the expansion of the district?
It's a great question. I don't know that number offhand, but you can see a little bit graphically when we were running the acreage numbers, it expanded by like a margin of 0.4. So like 40% more area than what was included in the 2023 warrant boundary. JT can kind of, while we're talking, see if he can kind of run those numbers behind the scenes and get you an answer on the parcel number, because they're kind of a little bit apples and oranges, right? Acreage isn't a perfect proxy for for parcels.
Okay, great.
Any other questions on this or comments with the Elliott Street corridor expansion?
I think it's good analysis. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so moving through this, so that was the sort of test of, what would the impact be if we expanded the Elliott Street corridor? If we do not do that, we hold to the 2023 boundary. The changes to the parameters do gain us a little bit of, they rebalance things in a way that's productive. In other words, they're slightly increasing the density, the number of units that are coming out of the Elliott Street corridor, which enables you to then see reductions elsewhere. Similarly, for Granite Ave North, for this district, we restored that to the set of parameters that we had in 2023, because there was kind of a broad understanding that there was a lot of aspects of that made sense. But we have, kept the reduced numbers that we talked about for Granite Ave South, and we've, in this case, as an offset from kind of regaining the capacity in Granite Ave North that we had reduced previously, we've looked at, what would that look like if we were to reduce the East Milton Square numbers a little bit more, to kind of keep us riding very close to those compliance targets. So you can see here that we've got the East Milton Square at 22 units per acre, 286 units, and a density of 13.9. And just for comparison, if you look back to 2023, we had East Milton Square at 30 units per acre. It was carrying 423 in unit capacity, and had a density of 20.6. So that's a decent reduction there that, if depending on preference, that we could focus that reduction in East Milton Square, we could focus it in Granite Ave South, we could split it between the two. But that's kind of, it does give you, there are some benefits to this added refinement of the Elliott Street corridor parameters in that it's enabling you to have a little bit more flexibility in thinking about how to sort of right size the districts that are elsewhere in the town.
So does that approximately like 450 units out of East Milton? And
yeah, so I'll toggle to
many
that
more
now, actually.
Okay.
So this is, if you kind of take that as a snapshot of, where we are right now in terms of fine tuning these parameters, and we use those parameters for the Elliott Street corridor as well as the sort of companion changes that we made in Blue Hills Parkway to keep those aligned with one another. That looks like having an additional 393 units that are being carried along the Elliott Street corridor and Blue Hills Parkway. And then a reduction of 445 units in the collective East Milton subdistricts, including Granite Ave North, South, and East Milton Square. So that's the rebalancing that's happening. And then in addition to that, across the town as a whole, this is a reduction of 52 units from the capacity that we were showing in 2023.
And we're not looking at 701 Randolph Ave or St. Pius with this, right?
Not yet. So we do
Not
have
yet.
analysis on that
Okay,
for
good.
you today.
All right. Wait
And
for
that's
that.
using this as a baseline. So if we kind of assume that, we'd be making some version of these tweaks in all cases, and then if we treat that as a baseline and we try and use these alternative subdistricts to achieve kind of one of two goals, either further reducing Granite Ave South and East Milton Square, or fully replacing East Milton Square, what is the impact? So we've done the next sort of layer of that analysis for the alternative subdistricts using this as the starting point.
So going back to the height on Granite Ave South,
Yeah.
and did that change?
We have not changed that. Right now, the 25 units per acre is the primary constraint on it.
Okay.
So I suspect, we haven't tested this yet, but I suspect, for instance, if we brought this down to 3.5, it might not have any impact on the unit numbers.
Okay.
I haven't confirmed that yet, but that's my sense. So we can certainly look if there's more kind of building form changes that you want to see for Granite Ave South. We can test what that looks like with these kind of broad unit parameters.
So just generally speaking then, with this kind of density reduction, you're going to have a lot more open space if you reach that height, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's some benefit to continuing to allow that height, because if somebody were to solve their site plan with that height in mind, it would enable them to have more open space.
Okay.
And we're still not looking at net news anymore? These numbers are just a shuffle, right?
Yeah, we're just, in this presentation for you today, we don't have any net new calculations, but we can do that. We have the method in place, but we haven't run it for this presentation.
Yeah, I think when we get before our public forum, we should really have net news for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We can do that.
I'm good.
Okay.
All right. This next piece kind of shows those alternative subdistricts we spoke about last time. We've kept them all in the running for now, just to kind of give you a full picture. So just to refresh people's minds, there's 3 different variations on the Randolph Ave sites. Randolph Ave 1, which is kind of the largest of the 3. Randolph Ave 2, which is just that upper portion, and then Randolph Ave 3 is the lower portion. And then we also have 711 Randolph Ave, 1200 Brush Hill Road, St. Pius, and Truman Parkway. Just a reminder that these 2, 1200 Brush Hill Road and St. Pius, might run into spot zoning issues. And Truman Parkway still has kind of a contiguity question that we'll ultimately want to raise with the state if we choose to include it. So with that background in mind, this is the analysis that we have for you today on these. What we've done here is we've basically taken these 2 goals, which you see on the left. So one goal is, what if we use these new districts to reduce Granite Ave South and East Milton? And just to enable this to be like a really clear comparison, we've just plugged in some placeholder numbers of like reducing it by how much, just so you can kind of see the relative impact of these different subdistricts. So what we're assuming for all of these subdistricts is that we're bringing Granite Ave South down from the currently modeled 222 units to just 154 units. That's a reduction of 68 units in that location. We're also assuming that we're bringing East Milton Square down from the currently modeled 286 units to 250 units. So that's a reduction of 36 units there. So certainly you could reduce it by more, you could reduce it by less, you could change the balance between the 2. But again, this is just to kind of give you a picture of like, if we're gonna move forward with like 1 or 2 of these to test them further, which ones are the best candidates to do that with. So kind of holding that constant, we then tested what the impact would be for each of these candidate subdistricts. We similarly did the same thing for a different goal. These are independent of one another, to completely replace East Milton Square. So in other words, remove East Milton Square from the MBTA Communities 3A districts as a whole, and substitute in a different alternative subdistrict that we're evaluating. And so something to just kind of be aware of is that these moves have a very different relationship to the overall sort of puzzle piece dynamic that your subdistricts have. So achieving a reduction in Granite Ave South and East Milton Square, as soon as you do that, you've kind of brought the overall density down. So we're playing kind of a density game here of which of these subdistricts is able to contribute to boosting your density most effectively with the least sort of ballooning impacts in terms of the number of units overall. And then alternatively for East Milton Square, in almost all of these cases, it's really just a unit replacement. In other words, we need to get back up to the minimum unit target. And so density isn't as much of a driver, and that's why you see the same number recurring over and over again, because that's the unit gap that you need to get back up to your unit target. The only one that flips that is Randolph Ave 1, because it's such a large sub-district that it actually does start to bring that density conversation back. So with that kind of preamble or backstory, you can see here these numbers, the plus or minus, is the impact on the town-wide unit capacity. So if you were to use Randolph Ave 1 for this purpose, it would result in an addition of 288 units to your overall town-wide capacity number in order to get to that density of 15 units per acre. Inversely, if you were to use Randolph Ave 1 to replace East Milton Square, it would result in a reduction of 21 units from the overall townwide unit capacity. So we kind of went across the board there. You can see that the numbers, and what we've done is we've kind of highlighted the ones that have the least sort of impact at a town-wide scale in terms of adding units and kind of balancing that a little bit with these new candidate districts themselves. In order to serve in that role, what would they need to carry? So for 711 Randolph Ave, if you use that to reduce Granite Ave South and East Milton Square, you'd see an addition of 92 units townwide. In order to serve in that role, 711 Randolph Ave would need to carry 196 units at least. And it would need to be at a district at a density of 30.6 at minimum. So that's that's a relatively dense district, but it's not, if you kind of compare back to like these as a touch point, this is the current numbers for Granite Ave North, South, and East Milton Square. So it's a little bit more than the density that we're looking at in Granite Ave South right now. Conversely, for St. Pius, that is a slightly smaller kind of overall impact on the townwide unit capacity, a gain of 90 units townwide. And St. Pius would need 194 units on that site in order to serve in that role, and that translates to a district density of 30.8. So a similar kind of density level. So both of these would be coming in at a density that's slightly higher than Granite Ave South, and would be carrying slightly fewer units than Granite Ave South, but kind of a similar order of magnitude. So maybe I'll pause there and then we can talk a little bit about the East Milton Square, just because I know this is like a dizzying amount of numbers to digest at once.
So just to be clear, when you say the current Granite Ave South, it's the current reduction that you're showing us tonight, right?
Yes, that's a good clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, without the American Legion Hall, right?
Correct.
Yep, without the American Legion Hall.
Correct, and the lower number of units.
Right.
So which is kind of driving a little bit why you need more here, right?
Well, yeah, because it was dense as hell.
Correct.
In the original.
Yeah, I mean, we had asked if this could be 15 units an acre, and the answer is no, it looks like, in order to meet other parameters. Now, but it's because you're adding land area, is my understanding of it. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. So essentially, by reducing the number of units that, or the density of Granite Ave South and East Milton Square, right, that means that we're then looking at adding other districts. Those carry more acreage. You need a certain number of units for that new acreage to not drag down your density numbers.
Yeah, so if you use these, if you want to try and keep not add too many more units, you're looking at a swap, probably meeting it more one-to-one or something similar,
there's some truth in that. And at which point it becomes a question of, when you think big picture in terms of planning, logics, which of these is the best site for multifamily housing.
Right.
You know, by comparison, I think my inclination is that Granite Ave South carries some additional benefits, but I think in terms of the multifamily unit logic, but obviously that there's other reasons why you might prefer some of these other candidate sub-districts. I think that it's, you know, it might be productive to think of it in those terms.
And just to clarify, none of this is good planning logic.
No, it's not.
That
I mean,
depends on
it's always, there's an
perspective.
element of opinion in that. I think you're each entitled to your own opinion.
Yeah.
And I can share mine when you want it.
So we, I think we want to focus on the analysis for tonight. We're anticipating getting the court decision before long. So this is really helping us be prepared for that, you know, having done the analysis. So whether one of these is the best idea or not, I don't think is really what we're going to focus on tonight. I think the idea is just to take a look at the analysis and ask questions. That's my understanding of what we agreed to last time. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's keep going then, Zoe.
Yep, can do. So for East Milton Square, so this is a different strategy. This is thinking about if we added a district and used it to enable us to remove East Milton Square from the picture, what would the impacts be? What would the ripple effects be? So you can see here that Randolph Ave 1, again, because of that larger district area, it does still result in a reduction overall, town-wide, of 21 units. But then these other ones, you know, all result in a greater reduction of units. And so in looking at these to kind of pick between all of these numbers that were the same, the metrics that we used was which of these districts serve in this role, in other words, result in that town-wide unit reduction of 73, but themselves are at a lower density, you know, compared to the other sub-districts. So the two that stood out in that respect were Randolph Ave 2 and Truman Parkway. That's because these are each on the larger side, and so they're more analogous to the acreage of the East Milton Square district itself, and so they are able to kind of carry that a density that's more analogous to the density that we were seeing at East Milton Square versus the higher densities that we were seeing up here. So Randolph Ave 2 to serve in this role to enable us to replace East Milton Square, it would have to carry 213 units at a density of 18.8. Truman Parkway, if it were to serve in that role, enable us to take East Milton Square out, it would also need to be at that 213 unit number, but it would be at a density of 26.3, again, because it's a slightly smaller site. So that's kind of the picture there. It has a very different impact in this case, and you could expect that this kind of profile is how other kind of swaps or replacement might go. They'll each be unique to the district that you're swapping, as in, you know, Granite Ave South is serving a particular role in the overall town-wide picture. East Milton Square is serving a slightly different role. So when you swap for those districts, they'll have a different impact, or you'll need to have the new sub-district play a different role in order to sort of successfully swap in.
And Randolph Ave 2, can you go back to that map, please, just to refresh?
So that's kind of the corner here from Hillside Street to Randolph Avenue. It's both the parcel that's kind of at the nose there, and then the one that's the next one down along Randolph.
So that's at 15 acres, and then 7-Eleven is how many acres? 7-Eleven Randolph Ave?
That's 8.1. So it would, you know, you could still make use of this. It would still have the same town-wide impact, but 7-Eleven Randolph Ave would have to be at a slightly higher density than Randolph Ave would need to be.
And Truman Park
that both of them have a, I presume they have enough wetlands that we're getting a significant bump on the density denominator.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. Thank you, Matthew. You can see that some of these, there's no wetlands, there's no difference between density denominator and total area. The density denominator is what drives the the final density calculation. So it can be helpful to you when you have that sort of gap there. It ends up boosting your density numbers, which is a big factor for Milton.
So just to clarify that, you back out the wetlands area in 711, or in all of them, but in 711 Randolph Avenue, you use 6.4 as your density denominator. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Correct. Yep. So it means that, you're dividing by this number, which means if you have the same number of units, you divide it by 8.1, you get a lower number than if you divide it by 6.4.
Yeah. Great. I said we would have to just overlay 711 Randolph Ave with a few more units to get the density up. And seeing as it's already being built, the likelihood of that
so basically
happening.
you'd have to, to serve in this role. So there's this one is pretty easy to kind of do in your head because essentially you need 213 units. So to replace the gap that you get from East Milton Square and get up to the minimum number of units. So if you kind of do the math here, it's basically 200. You need to get 213 units out of 711 Randolph Ave to hit your minimum target. And that would be divided by 6.4 acres in this case.
Okay, got it.
So I'm just doing that now. So that would be at 33.3.
If you choose to put all 200 on 711 Randolph Ave, right? But you'd spread them around town.
That's kind of the tricky thing, right? So I think, in order for it to, have this impact, in other words, like a townwide reduction in units, it would need to be denser. But if you want to spread it out, then you end up with more units overall in the town because you still have to get to that minimum density of 15.
Yeah, or if we looked at other 40Bs that are approved or other projects that are being built, and capitalize on those in the same way that are not on this list. I'm just thinking out loud, I'm sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. I mean, I think that's there's an opportunity to spread it around, but it needs to still collectively get to that 15 units per acre minimum. So there's going to need to be some, because you have, I'm going to toggle back to the overall calculation here. So because there's some of the sub-districts and, the Elliott Street corridor is really important to your overall strategy because it's what enables you to get the minimum transit area percentage that you need. And there's other it helps you with contiguity as well. But it has lower densities. And so that means that somewhere else in your mix of districts, apart from the mandatory mixed use ones that you have, so excluding Milton Station East, excluding Milton Station West, you need some districts that are going to be at a density that's above 15 units per acre in order to counterbalance the impact of having the Elliott Street corridor at a lower density.
Yeah, or get Elliott down to 5,000 square foot lots so the density goes up. Or a combination
certainly
of
that would
both.
help. It would give you a little bit, it would make it a less of a dramatic issue. I think you'd still need to have some districts that are, carrying that higher density, but it's certainly if we feel like Elliott Street corridor and if there's, enough public support for it, if that can go down to 5,000 square foot minimum lot sizes there, that will really help a lot with the density that you're getting out of Elliott Street corridor.
I'm tracking, Zoe. Sounds good.
Okay, I think that's, in terms of just the analysis work, that's all we have for you tonight. We're happy to stay on for any other questions or comments, discussion that you want to have. And if there's anything in particular that you'd like us to run as a follow-up analysis, I know that you're kind of preparing for eventually kind of coming back to the public for a public forum, but I understand that might be something that where the timeline is more tied up with the SJC decision as well.
I think at the our last meeting, Zoe, where we discussed this, we wanted to bring you in and see the analysis that we had asked for you to do. But I do think I think we agreed that we would hit a pause on further analysis because we're expecting that decision, within the next few weeks, really. We've heard, probably this month, but maybe January at the latest. And we want to be mindful of, the resources, financial resources, that are available. But, one of the things that kind of prompted us to continue with this is that this is where a lot of questions were asked, previously is, what if you did this location or that location? So I think this helps us be prepared for what does come and what we need to do next with it. So does this seem like a good pause point from your point of view as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of value to, resuming once there's greater clarity around what parameters you'll be held to. And I think you have a good foundation with this work to sort of be able to make decisions more authoritatively once you have that sort of broader context in hand. I don't know, Matthew, if you have anything else to kind of add to that or feel differently.
Yeah, I agree that there's still at least 40 dials that we can adjust still. But I think big picture, the critical questions are we tweaking the districts that we had in 2023, or are we adding another district and replacing one that was there before? And I think we have a very good foundation of what those numbers look like if you do that. So I feel like you're in a very good place to be ready to at least initiate a pretty substantive decision-making process if and when you need to.
So our thought was we would have a public forum also after, as you know, we postponed it after we got the decision. And so I think one of the next things that we'll want to do upon receiving that decision is bring the public, up to speed. And so hopefully we can think about a date in January, I'm kind of thinking, for that forum. So exactly what that's going to look like in terms of content, I think, we'll still have to look at or discuss rather, but maybe that you can be thinking of that as sort of the next step is, kind of how we'll structure the kind of bring the public that hasn't attended these meetings and thought about this much in the months that we have. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick note that schedules for January are starting to book up with meetings, so we will do our best to accommodate whatever schedule you'd like to aim for. But as soon as you do have a sense of a date, please let us know and we'll do our best to hold it and make room for it.
Okay, so we'll have Cheyenne be in touch with you as soon as we better understand what our schedule for that would be.
I think we should also allow Meredith as our chair to be part of that conversation.
Sure.
You're doing a great job tonight leading the meeting, but I think Meredith belongs here for us to make any plan, to get back together on that topic.
Okay, so I think unless there's any other questions or comments.
I have none. No.
I'm good.
All right, thank you so much, Team UTL.
Likewise.
Happy holidays,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
We'll speak in the new year, I'm sure.
All right.
Thank you all.
Okay,
guys.
thank
Happy
you.
holidays to you all.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, Merry
Thank you.
Christmas.
Okay, under old business, at the last meeting, Meredith and Jim and I discussed in detail the site plan approval bylaw. If you watched, I think, Maggie, you said you watched some of the tape. You see that we voted to submit that.
Well, with
and-
edits though, right? Weren't there
Yeah,
some
we're
edits that
still-
we're going to go around and then we're going to look at a clean copy and then submit it?
Well, I think we voted to submit that, but I'm happy to, run through it, pull it up on the screen, talk about the edits.
Rick, because I understood that you were going to make a few edits before we submitted it,
On the
right?
site plan approval one,
Yeah.
or
Or that was
on
done
the-
as is. It was totally done.
I thought we had to, well, again, apologize for missing the meeting, but I thought, don't we still have to have a public hearing on it?
Yes, we do.
So, and at that public hearing, there could be edits that come from that public hearing.
My experience with any of the zoning is, if we can submit something to town council, which we said we were going to do to get some feedback on that.
For that, yeah.
Then we will have opportunity to edit it further. And of course, we wanted to get Maggie and Sean's input on it as well. So, but the public hearing next week on the zoning, Cheyenne, is for the map amendment. Does it also include site plan approval or just the map amendment?
So it had all three, but I think Meredith was thinking of pushing ADU to January. So that's where we left off on that.
Yeah, so
That's a good call.
yeah, I was just going to make note of some of the new information on that when we get there. So I think what we could do, since we have the public hearing next week and we have a draft in the box in our shared drive, Jim, I have to go back and look at what I said I was going to amend last week since
That's right. If
it's
there's
not
nothing,
popping
it's
today.
fine.
Yeah,
Just-
so one of the things that
I'm not
like,
pushing for edits. I'm just saying if there
Yeah.
is, it's just not how I remembered it. That's
that
all.
popped out to me, and we don't have to discuss it right now, but was the time frame. So, I'm extremely sympathetic to the length of time for applicants, because it took me like 3 years. However, I am a little bit cautious that I don't know if we should box ourselves in by having a time frame, because I think, Jim, you talked about it, was it 6 months or 12 months? And I would just hate from the town's perspective if, that we could be sued because we're not meeting that deadline. And I'm all for moving things along expeditiously. But, what are the consequences if we put a time frame limit in it and we don't meet it? And partially I'm looking at, this moment in time when as a town we're severely understaffed. The planning department is in transition, DPW is in transition, our building department was short-staffed for a while because people are out on medical leave. Our engineering department will be short-staffed. So, and then if there are applications that then also have to go to Concom and ZBA and go to peer review, I just, and again, I want to move things along, but I just am afraid of putting in an exact time frame. So I don't know if there are other towns have, like, how do they?
Yeah, Lexington I know has it, and I think Natick does too.
Yeah.
But
So-
we were going to ask town council to look at it, I remember. But then, did we mostly take it out?
Yeah, we left it in.
Yeah,
We left it in?
yeah,
Good.
that's what I kind of.
I can pull.
Hell is it?
Cheyenne, do you want to pull up?
Newton has time limits, but that's related to appeal. But Lexington, I think, has it.
Or do you want me to pull it up?
9334. Are we going to discuss it now?
Okay, thanks. Well, we can just look and see if that's in there. Yeah, I'm happy to discuss.
Or, we can
You'd
think
like
about
to.
it. That was just one of the things that kind of popped out at me.
Oh yeah, for a minor. So Lexington is tiered for their minor site plan. They give it 60 days of receipt of the application. Planning board's for a written decision within 150 days. Yes, I mean it is in other zoning, other towns. And if town council, I mean, I'd love to have it in there. If town council can whip up something that's legal, and maybe it's 120 days or 160 days with extensions.
Yeah, so maybe that's it. Maybe it's something like there's a a time frame, but there is wording in there that allows for more time
Yeah,
without
that makes
us
sense.
getting a.
Yeah, I mean, we put, what's in the folder included that Cheyenne made edits live at our last
I
meeting,
remember,
right?
yeah.
So, what's in there now, in paragraph O, says, in general, site plan review of projects of average complexity should be completed no more than 6 months after the submission. So it's not a hard, fast requirement,
Yeah.
and it's giving an expectation so that there's the board and the applicant have some, obviously that implies that if it's very little complexity, it should be done sooner, and if it's highly complex, it should take longer. I mean, I think that's implied in that language, but.
So 6 months, if the planning board meets twice a month, 6 months might seem like a long time if we're working on things every single day. But when we're only meeting twice a month, 6 months doesn't seem like a lot if there are other things coming forward. I'm just trying to protect the town on this. Of course, I'm sympathetic to the applicants. But I just think in this perspective, we're trying to protect the town.
So in that case, it's probably just worth asking town council what he thinks this language does.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because we did talk about this. I was not on the last meeting either, and I apologize for that as well. But we don't want to disadvantage, all future planning boards from being able to do it. However, I feel like, and I think this is really well written, I think we've created such great structure here that there's a really good opportunity to accomplish, all approvals within 6 months, because there is so much structure here. The definition that anybody that, chooses to come with a site plan approval that they have here, I think will probably create an expeditious process. The one thing you never know is how many you could have all at one time. Yeah. It's almost like our zoning board when they faced all of those 40Bs, right. And they had to split the zoning board up to be able to, conduct the hearings, that are required by law. So you can't imagine, how many applications you might have. But, I feel like the 6 months is a good time frame, and I can see both points of view. Jim's for making sure that we have something. You obviously went through this process, and I'd hate to think that we position any future planning board, in a position where they have a hard time meeting the expectations. But probably the best thing to do is just what you said, Cheryl. Let town council tell us how restrictive that language is. And if the language is so restrictive, then maybe we have to consider, loosening it a little bit. But until then, probably wait for town council to tell us.
One thing I'll say about this current draft, I think we all looked at other towns, at least a half a dozen, and they all had some form, this kind of content, maybe not the exact language, but this kind of content. And also I'll point out that on the design standards, those were included in the MBTA zoning that had gone to HLC. And what we remember about the MBTA zoning is as of right? So that's the same as site plan approval. And Tim had said that they didn't have any objections. So I feel as if the content that we've laid out in here should hold up. But having town council review it, and then obviously it'll get sent out. But the other thing to point out, I'll point out again, is that there has been legislation proposed to include site plan approval in the zoning act. But remember, it's not there now. It's something that each town adopts itself versus like being in the zoning like special permits are. So
That's got to be where it's going, though.
I think it's
can't see
probably
it not
going
getting
that
there in
way.
the next 5 years.
Right. I pointed out because that's ADU went that way, right? And multifamily housing has gone that way, so.
And, yeah, just as long as there's flexibility, that's all that I would like to see. And then the other question is, site plan approval is just simple majority, correct?
Correct. We have that, a vote of 3.
Yeah, okay. So, and I'm not sure if I read this in another, somewhere else, that it could be a 2/3 if it is specifically stated.
If it's
in the
tied to a
by-
special permit,
If it's tied to a special permit, it's 2/3.
because the special permit
It
requires that.
2/3, okay. Yes,
And
I
you're
just
you're
need-
granting them at the same time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I just, clarification.
It'd be interesting to know this, the applicability here, how many that would have triggered in the past year, right? How many site plan approvals would this now capture that wasn't previously captured?
I don't think it captures additional. I think what it does is set out a better framework that sets the expectations for everyone. Because what we have currently is, we don't have ADUs currently, of course, but the multifamily is in there, commercial is in there, any of the parking loading service is in there. So what this added was this idea that we talked about with something where you're expanding the use intensity. So like a bar, like a much increased seating of a restaurant or an entertainment use. So something that's like 10 Bassett Street. They had exterior changes, so they got triggered. But if they hadn't had exterior changes, that use change would trigger it, because the intensity of site use is a lot different. So I think that we had that discussion about we should include that, and that language, this language I'm pointing to my screen, it's I think on the screen too there under applicability, Cheyenne, it's number 3. Maybe you can be, it should be on page 1. They're in the middle. If you can just zoom in a little to make it a little bit bigger, please. That's the one that's not in our current trigger.
Be under applicability.
Yeah.
I'm reading that on my screen here too. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can all say it is way better than what we have.
Oh, yeah.
And, I've seen where we've put in new zoning, we've gone and amended it more than once, just to fix things.
Not that there's that many 3 families in town, but number 1 is going to create a lot of site plan review. Right?
Yeah, the
multi-families.
The 2 families won't be counted in that.
No, I know, not 2s, but I'm saying 3s. I think there's no 4s in town. Oh, there's maybe 1 4 in town, but it's condos. Anyway, I mean, it'll. Yeah.
Condos would get covered as well as rentals, so it doesn't, the ownership is not triggering. But the idea is that this would apply to MBTA communities, and a 3-family, it falls into that, right?
No, I get it.
So everyone that came to speak to us said that we should have site plan approval on the 3 families too. So I think the existing 3 families, unless they change something that applies to this, they're not subject to it, right? It's the new ones.
Construction, redevelopment, or expansion of multifamily residences and ADUs. That's not new. That's if I want to remodel one, right? I'm not fighting it. I'm just saying that that's, to Sean's question, I think that's going to drive this board to be busy with site plan review. But I see the value in it. I'm not taking anything away from it. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, that's
The question is, I don't think our question is, we're not saying to reduce the number that would come before the board. It's just a matter, do we have enough time to be able to, can we anticipate that a board could, within 6 months, accomplish, no matter what?
Oh, right.
Yeah. accomplish the approval process? That's the only question, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that's
Correct,
really
yes,
what
yeah.
you started with earlier.
Yeah.
So I think coming back around to what you suggested earlier, Cheryl, we're pitching this to town council to say, is the time frame so restrictive that an applicant can expect absolutely a decision within 6 months, or does the language allow us a longer period of time, but give them a reasonable expectation of time, not a fixed one?
Gotcha.
See what they say.
And we can see if anyone in the public has any comment on that provision at our public hearing next week,
Yeah.
because that will be advertised and people become aware of it if they're not aware of it now.
Yeah, and depending on which end of the table you're sitting on, you have a difference of an opinion. Right now, I'm at this end of the table.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I have my town hat on.
Yeah.
One thing I say though is really it's somewhat dependent upon the applicant as well.
Yeah.
Like the applicant earlier, it took the comments that we provided the first time, didn't make a lot of adjustments, but then the second time made a lot. So we've had 3 meetings with them, and it could have taken longer if, they hadn't taken those comments
Right.
to heart, right? So I actually think the pre-file opportunity with the board, not just with the staff, will help in the timing too, because, we could have maybe, even on that one, cut it back a couple of meetings, right? So some of them can go, even though bigger, depending upon, being clear here, right? Like being clear with our expectations are. I found it pretty interesting because that particular applicant is not one that's familiar with working in Milton, just came and, went through what we have on record as our requirements, had the pre-meeting, with the staff and so forth. And it shows you how we need this,
Yeah.
right?
And we may be getting more of them,
Yeah.
you know.
So even if it's not, even if there's room for improvement, I think it's good to get it on the books.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Totally, I definitely agree with that.
All right, so let's, I think, have the hearing next week, see what other changes may come out of that, and then make sure we click the one, or hit the ones that we talked about the last meeting. Sound good?
That's great.
Okay.
And who gets it to town council? Cheyenne? Or it's already in front of him? Like how quick can he turn this around?
Normally, staff would submit it, and sometimes it might be after the public hearing, but I don't know. Cheyenne, if you have an answer on what the timing of that is?
So I believe he already has the site
Okay.
plan and the zoning amendment. He's going to come back with any comments.
Great.
He didn't say like a specific date, but when it comes in, I'll send it to you guys.
Great, thank
Nice.
you.
Good job.
All right, on accessory dwelling units, Cheyenne mentioned earlier that the building commissioner would like to be involved with us. We also received an email that HLC has issued draft guidelines and a process. I have signed up for Monday's information session with them. I've read the draft guidelines. It makes me think we have to revise what we're doing because, in particular, design guidelines can't apply to ADUs if they don't apply to the primary residence, which we don't have design guidelines for single families, except it says in the case of a historic district. So that's something I think we're going to need to think about.
Wait, when it goes to the historic district, is it a local historic district, or is it
It's the local
the
historic.
local historic?
It's not the national park
not-
ones.
yeah,
We don't have
so-
any in Milton.
Yeah.
Although they're, I think, bringing that back to town meeting, the study committee is, right? Let me just call up, I highlighted some things in what we were given. I'll just call it up on my screen here.
Yeah, I was on the one on the 10th at 9 o'clock. It was an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, I got on late to that
It was
too.
all right.
Yeah.
But they did say that we talked about gross floor area. That's
Yeah.
measured from the exterior faces of the walls. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
But they
so-
also, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, they also said that we have the ability to limit ADUs to one per lot.
Yes. Yep.
We can write that right in our zoning.
Yep.
So I'd like to push for that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing, I know that someone else who attended the meeting or the info session this week said that they're going to have a model bylaw, and it looks like they're trying to get this all done by February 2nd. So I still think it makes sense for us to have at least a framework, like, and maybe take out some of the things we don't think we can have, but hit the things that we know we want. Like, we don't want short-term rental, right? You know, if we said we wanted to limit it to one on a parcel, I think we could definitely put that in, you know, but we're going to have to pare back some of the other things I think that we thought we might be able to include.
It is a little. It's a tight time frame. Like public comments are
December 20th to January 10th.
December 20th
right?
to January 10th
For over the holidays.
for the whole
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
And every resident and every
Yeah.
planning board of
Yeah.
every 350 communities to have a comment. And I don't think HLC is doing the communities any favors by having such a tight time.
You want to have that conversation right now?
And I understand that the legislature put it in as a February 2nd deadline. So, again, our legislators did not do us any favors. And where were they advocating for their constituents? Absent, I think. So it is a lot of work in a very short amount of time. And I did find it interesting that on the webinar the other day, unlike the one previously, you couldn't see people's comments.
No, they didn't let you see the comments.
So, like at the other infomercial, in the chat, you could see what all the other 200 people were commenting on, and they shut them down. You couldn't see it, and I thought that was kind of interesting. It's just nice to see what other towns are thinking. Yeah. Without having to call people from other towns to find out what they're thinking. It just
what
was.
Region of the state, what questions are coming?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things that I flagged is that we should think about, and we can talk about this with Meredith next week, whether we want to submit comments.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things that I flagged was not just is it apply to any zoning. So if you look at definition of single-family residential zoning district, it's any zoning district where single-family residential dwellings are permitted or an allowed use. Those are allowed in our business districts. So, now the ADUs would be applied to our business districts because the single families are allowed there. Yeah. So is that something that we think is a good idea? And then the other thing that for me was this pre-existing non-conforming, because it does say here, it doesn't really address accessory, like if you're, I don't think, and maybe they did at the hearing or the info session, and I'll learn more on Monday. But if you have a carriage house or a garage that meets the accessory building use, but not the primary residence use, so setbacks are different for accessory building. But
that's an interesting one, because I was thinking about that. So setbacks are different for accessory dwellings because they're typically not habited, right? It's a garage, it's a gazebo, a pool house. Now, if you start putting people in those and they're 5 feet off the lot line, I don't think that's what the neighbor signed up for. So I'd like to see the accessory dwelling units, if they're a converted carriage house, maintain the same setbacks as the principal dwelling.
So my question would be, though, can we require that a proposed ADU be allowed in an existing carriage house or something that's non-conforming, but by special permit, so it can be looked at on a case-by-case basis? because
and I think that's important because there are
otherwise you're
so
going to have a
many.
tear down of stuff.
Yeah, there are so many pretty old carriage houses that would be great for an ADU that I'd hate to see torn down.
Exactly.
If it's, has significant value. But if it's kind of just to your point, if it's not anything attractive or, I think our setbacks should be
Yeah.
enforced
By
if we can do that.
Special permit to us or the ZBA?
Well, I would think to us, but normally non-conforming goes to the ZBA, so I'm not quite sure how that works jurisdictionally, but.
And right now, our temporary apartments go to ZBA.
Yeah.
And they're going to come to us, right? Well, that was one of our questions.
Well, that's the other thing. The other question is what do we do about what happens with the temporary apartments? I think you had asked Maggie whether that provision could just stay. And that's a question I think we said town council will have to answer. Whether we have to, whether we would be required to remove it based on this. And I don't know that I have a strong opinion on that yet, having read through this. But any comments?
Is that question whether you could have both an ADU and a temporary apartment bylaw? Keep the temporary apartment bylaw that we have?
Well, I don't think you can put those restrictions on that are in our temporary apartment bylaw. But if for some reason it didn't, let's just say like right now it says it's in a single family district, but we have, let's say, a property that's not zoned single family that somebody wants to put an ADU in or a temporary apartment. They still have that right. I think I'd have to go back and look at the temporary apartment language actually.
Yeah, it would have to be a true temporary apartment though, as intended for elder care or something, or to have a nanny live
Family
there.
member.
And that's what I was thinking with this. The 900 square feet cap is great, but let's say you have two elderly parents and you want them living with you and you need more than 900 square feet. That's why it's nice to keep our existing ADU bylaw or temporary apartment bylaw in place and then have this one as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to think a little bit more about this, but I can see merit to having both.
Yeah.
Because the temporary apartment bylaw, as I have seen it used, is for the basis of what you just described. It's often, I've seen it used for the basis of elderly parents that, needed some support. And it would be different. It's different than an ADU. It's different. It's generally for a shorter period of time or anticipated for a shorter period of time. And it might need a different level of flexibility.
It's also required though to be ripped out or converted.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is pretty onerous.
Yeah,
Well, that's the beauty of it because you don't have to go ahead and follow the building code for a two-family where you have separate sprinklers and fire protection walls and all that stuff and two means of egress. You could literally screw a door shut and put a egress out your back door. Easy.
I don't think that they're calling this a two-family though, are they, with the ADU?
Oh, no, but I think it should be.
Code-wise?
I 100% think it should follow the same code as the two-family building code. Because people are going to get into landlording. Now we're getting off subject, but with the ADU, it's easy to revert it back. There's not much to rip out. So I guess it's just a reason to have two bylaws.
Right.
Temporary apartment, ADU.
I need to think a little bit more about this, like I said earlier, but we want to create flexibility for the residents.
Mm-hmm.
That if someone had a situation where the temporary apartment bylaw was less restrictive for them to accomplish their intended need, that they had it and they could utilize it and not force them into an ADU set of guidelines that might be more restrictive and difficult for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's really what's on my mind.
Yeah, because my understanding is anybody who's ever applied for a temporary apartment has never been denied here in Milton. So the ZBA has always been generous, and the only drawback to the temporary apartment, it is a term limit, I think, of no more than 5 years.
But you can extend it, right?
You can extend it,
Yeah.
but
It has a lot of
renewal dates
restrictions,
come
though.
up fast and are sometimes overlooked.
It also has a maximum size of 800 square feet.
Yeah, and
And 1/3 the area of the dwelling, not a half, which is in the new one. And it requires, owner occupancy and family member relationship. So it is more restrictive in terms of, I'm not sure what the benefit for some people would be in that scenario, but we should ask town council if it's even allowed, is my first thought.
yeah.
I mean, the benefit is you just want it for your family member without having to go through, as Sean said, all the requirements. So you might not get a full kitchen, or you might have to take it out, but it's for a shorter amount of time, and
you
it's
won't
never
have to go
been-
to site plan
You
review,
don't have
right?
to go site plan.
Well, you have to
review.
go for a special permit to the ZBA.
But that's much less obtrusive than site plan review that we're
Yeah.
passing, right?
I don't know.
And I'm just thinking,
You have to have plans, so you have
if
to
you look
show.
at everything that the site plan review makes an applicant submit versus the temporary apartment.
Well, the
It's got to
question
be
is,
easier to get a temporary apartment.
the other thing, no, but the other question is whether you can even subject it to what we have for site plan approval right now, because you can't subject the ADUs to more than you require for single families. And you don't require site plan review for single families.
Oh, well,
So
then it's out.
there's a lot in there to, I think, mull over in terms of, that says you can do site plan review, but who has site plan approval, site plan review for single families? I don't know other towns that do. So I think we need to think about what comments, if we want to submit formal comments to HLC, we should think about what those might be before the deadline, which is, let me see,
December
January
20th to
10th.
January 10th, I think.
January
is the
10th is
window.
it?
January 10th
Yeah.
is the public hearing.
They said they
and
won't accept any before the 20th.
Yeah.
They'll accept them, but they won't consider them.
January 10th is coming pretty close, right? So
It happens to be the
we
two
have,
least productive weeks of the entire year.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
well, I think they're working what
One of
they
the
were
most
given.
important pieces of legislation, right? I mean, this is a big deal. Anyone in the state can turn their house into a two-family. It's like, and you don't have to be owner occupied.
I think the concern that every town should have isn't the 900 square feet or half of the square footage of whatever the residence is. It's the minimum size. There is no minimum size.
Right.
And what could possibly happen without a minimum size? I think that was a miss, by or either intentional or unintentional. Not establishing a minimum size. There should be a minimum size.
I think there.
Just imagine, I'm sorry to interrupt
Yeah,
you. You could
no.
just imagine how some small homes could potentially get carved up and really, have some pretty less than desirable outcomes.
One thing, so Brian Furs spoke at the last meeting and he was talking about tiny homes. And, I'm not a big tiny home fan, but you roll this thing up on wheels.
This
Boom.
doesn't allow you to
I
have it on
understand that.
wheels. Yeah,
I
it
was
has to be on a
trying to
foundation.
finish. Yeah, so Meredith was talking about a permanent foundation, so the structure has to be on a permanent foundation. It's got to be a permanent structure. But I don't know what the minimum is for a bedroom, for the building code.
I think it's in the public health, could be in the regulations that a bedroom size should be
It's in the building code.
a certain size, right? If I
The building
through
code
the
has that
Department
too.
of Health?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the Department of Health, but I know the building code does, and the building code also has the requirement for a bedroom. And definitely a bedroom, and I believe living space to have access to air and light. So you have to be able to open a window.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Melanie, her first apartment, my wife's first apartment on Beacon Hill couldn't have been more than 200 square feet. It was an efficiency studio. Had a bathroom and a room and a tiny little sink with a fridge under it. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you don't know if it was legal or not.
No, this was legal.
It
on
was
Bowdoin
legal.
Street. It was-
Okay.
But still, the point is, you can carve out pretty small units
Yeah.
in a basement. I mean, anywhere.
Yeah. That's one of the concerns that I have. But
So that's
it'll
why
be
it's good the building inspector will come.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, it'd be really good to hear what his concerns are.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because he's the one that experiences this on a daily basis, not us as planning board
Yeah.
members. He's probably in and out. You know, one of the other comments I have, and I'm looking off the draft that Cheyenne has in our folder. I'd like to discuss this language that says encourage the permitting of properties that over time were converted to temporary apartments without approval. I don't think it should be encourage.
Yeah.
I think it should be require.
Right.
I don't think it's fair that someone should have to go through a process, you know, to get an ADU approval, and yet somebody who did it without, you know, did it illegally is allowed to keep it. That to me seems like you have a standard in your town that's not equitable to everybody. So if someone's going to have to go through a process to be able to have an ADU, somebody that currently has one that didn't go through the process should be required to make it legal.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just not fair.
No, it's not.
So
And it sets a terrible precedent for the next guy to just do it illegally.
And the other person I was thinking we should invite is the chief of police to come, and maybe he needs to understand that there are not any requirements for parking, you know, if you're within a half mile of a train.
or bus line.
And so I think I've said it before, as I don't want all these residents moving to town and then applying to the police department for a hardship permit. So I think we need the police department to be on board with not allowing them, because this is all supposed to be closer to transit.
Doesn't really matter though if they're not on board, because the law says that
Yeah.
we can't do it. So I guess what they're going to just have to enforce the laws that exist on the books in Milton, because they can't say no to something that the law says we have to do.
Right, but if somebody who somebody builds an ADU and they only put one parking spot, because that's the requirement in the law, that if you're outside the half mile, you only have to require one parking spot. So an ADU gets built, they provide one parking spot, but two cars come. You know, a resident of the ADU has two cars. There's not enough space for those two cars, so where does that other car get parked?
You're saying not to for the traffic committee? Who grants the?
The police department.
Okay.
The hardship permits. Yeah.
That, yeah, you can apply to the police department for an overnight hardship permit. So I don't think the police department should grant hardship permits
Right.
to ADU dwellings.
Yeah, it's a good point. So is it any bus line, or is it just the bus lines that were
Well, the
the MBTA bus lines?
it says
I'm sorry, the
it says
MBTA zoning.
I think it says
Or
MBTA.
silver.
Yeah, that's how I read it too. I didn't think it was any bus line.
Yeah, so the definitions. Bus station, a location serving as a point of embarkation for any bus operated by a transit authority. A transit authority.
Any bus line.
For routes that allow flag stop locations where passengers may signal for a bus stop at any point along its designated route, the entire route shall be considered a bus station.
And
So all of Route 28.
yes, I was
that's
going
the
to
whole
say,
town.
so on the Monday's meeting, it's interesting that HLC has expanded the definitions of, MBTA zoning and rapid transit. All of a sudden, they have they've expanded the, which I'm not sure if they legally can do because all these definitions are state, they're state defined by our legislation, and then all of a sudden now they've expanded it.
They can do whatever they want until someone takes them to court.
Yeah, so that was
Crazy.
kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So I'd like to be able to think about the draft that we have after I attend the information session on Monday.
Yeah.
So, and if you two attended and you have ideas about what we can do, maybe if you want to work on that draft that's in the folder. But even though we don't have a public hearing on ADU next week, I think we should, Meredith has said she's going to keep these 3 items on the agenda under the old business. So I think we can pick up this discussion then.
Did she say when she wanted to invite the building commissioner?
No. So I think
Do you think she'd do that for next week?
we may as well see if he has thoughts about it right away.
I think sooner
Yeah.
it'd be better.
So Cheyenne, do you mind speaking with Meredith and with Joe to see about him attending next week's meeting?
Can we also open it up to maybe Walter White? Because Joe is relatively new and Walter's been here a while.
I think
He really knows the code.
since the commissioner reached out to Cheyenne, I think we should go to the commissioner and see who he would like from his department,
I'm sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Could we
who he thinks should
ask
be.
him if
Yeah.
yes? Good.
Okay, sorry, Cheyenne, go ahead.
I was just saying I'll do that tomorrow.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
And the zoning map amendment, so are we good on ADU then? Okay.
We're good.
On the zoning map amendment, you sent out a revised map that Alan Bishop prepared, which seemed appropriate now.
So, sorry, about
Yeah.
the map. I had gotten a new map from Alan regarding, I think it was let me pull it up. Milton Village. I got a new map for him on that. And then I sent all of those maps to Nick. Then he came back regarding Brook Road, and he wants that one to be a little bit different. So Alan said he's gonna work on that tomorrow. So instead of that full red parcel that we have, that red line, it's really just gonna be 9, 5, and 3.
That was my
Right.
question. Fantastic. Good.
Okay. So we don't need to take any action tonight then on that? We'll need to wait?
No,
Okay.
yes.
So just on the other one where you sent the scenario 1 and scenario 2 for the Milton Village Central Ave, I didn't quite understand.
I'm looking in
I don't know.
at the map that was in the folder. There's just one map, I think. Do you want to pull that up, Cheyenne?
I thought that scenario 1 and scenario 2 and the
Yeah.
dashed lines were different.
So I think it's that one, which shows all of J.D. Wild's property in the Milton Village district. Right, so the Central Ave district starts at the end of his property. But we were just concerned with why it was in purple. And it was just
Yeah,
to show
so
ownership
then-
for some. So I'm sorry, there it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Right, you're right. The intent was to have all of his property
In the village district, right?
in the district. That's the way the language. I
Okay,
thought.
so right now, I guess
This one doesn't
maybe
have
I'm
it, though.
just old school. Right now, how has it been designated? Why is there prompting a change?
It was an oversight.
Okay.
So, because this is my understanding, what we call them overlays in Milton Village and Central Ave, what they really are planned unit developments, and they don't have a map associated with them. They just have criteria, and the criteria were crafted to be very specific to have only certain sites meet the criteria. So that was Mr. Whiteside's way of doing it, before. So, for example, there's the one overlay or PUD that allowed 88 Wharf. There's the only other property that would fall under that is extra space storage. And the other overlay that had a smaller minimum lot size is what allowed for 36 Central and 131 Elliott. So they were kind of just tailored. They met the size requirements, but they didn't have maps associated with them. Milton Village was done differently. And so apparently when that zoning was drafted, we had a map. Apparently we didn't adopt the map amendment at the time as a procedural matter.
Okay, so how come then we were presented with two scenarios? Are we choosing the map? That was my understanding, was somebody wanted our opinion to which scenario we should choose, because the boundary on scenario 1 was Morton Street, and the boundary on scenario 2 was between Morton Street and High Street. So my question
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, my question was, what's the benefit of being in one as opposed to being in the other?
Well, it's really not even a point of discussion. It's like the map needs to match the words that describe the boundaries. And what's on the screen right now is without the purple lines. I'm not sure why the purple lines are there, but otherwise, I know why that it's J.D. Wild's property. The map itself doesn't need to include that purple line, but otherwise that is the boundary of the district.
So the dotted red line at an angle on Morton.
That angle corresponds to the
language,
the property line.
Oh, okay.
So the reason it extended that far down was to incorporate that property. You think it's just a small parcel where the Webb Mill building is right there, but that parcel has a long tail. And so rather than have that parcel have part of it in the district and part out of the district, that was brought over to there, but then it doesn't include any other properties along Adams Street until you get over to High.
Okay, so that's what, when I was, talking with, a couple people, I said, oh, in your mind, where was Milton Village and where was Central Ave? I didn't understand it was all because of this one piece of property. I just thought, like, growing up in my mind, Milton Village was, Adams Street and halfway to like Milton Hill House, and the Central Ave district was kind of the like Steel and Rye down. But now I'm understanding it's really because we're trying to incorporate that one parcel in its entirety. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's scenario 1 is what we're going with.
And just a question on that. I understand the logic behind it, so that we don't have the village line. We don't have that property in two different villages, right? But is that a good enough reason?
It's not even that the district boundaries are described in the zoning. So it's not like we can have the map not match the zoning.
And it's described to be inclusive of that parcel?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, I've neglected to read it. I keep saying I'm going to every week, but I don't. But I shouldn't admit that on TV.
I don't know why.
Because does this scenario 1, this parcel being in Milton Village, does that allow it to be more dense? Does it allow it to have higher, taller buildings? Will that affect the people like on Morton? Those were just my questions. We've run into this problem before. If you look at the Milton Marketplace, that's in 2 different business districts, a residential district, and there are different triggers. So by putting all of this in one area, are we creating a problem?
my understanding is we need the map that matches the language that's in the zoning. And whether you like the map
Yeah,
or,
no, so,
or
yeah.
the district or not is really not relevant at this point in
Yeah.
time. It's because it's still eligible.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah,
that's why
it
I was
follows-
just,
it follows the whole
confused
parcel.
why we
Yeah, I
got
know,
the
I
two
understand
why
that.
we
Yeah.
got-
Because I think one of them was
Totally.
just wrong.
Oh, okay.
And that's,
Okay.
that's the,
Okay.
Yeah.
and I think maybe the one with the purple showing the parcel E22 is to show the logic of the line.
I think that's why it is there.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's
Okay.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that helps you understand why that red line is where it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's only there based on where that
Right.
parcel ends.
Right. But I don't know that belongs in a zoning map, honestly. So I don't
With
know.
the purple
The
or
purple?
the dotted red line?
The purple.
I don't think
It
it does.
doesn't.
Yeah.
They were
I mean,
supposed
you
to.
don't do that with any other parcel.
Right.
Why would you do it with that one?
Right.
Yeah.
Alan Bishop was
So-
supposed to take it out and give us a new map,
Right.
right?
So that's what I
For some
thought
reason it didn't
we were
happen.
going to have is a map
Right.
that doesn't have that purple but matches that red line. So the red line is such that the Central Ave Business District is not included in the Milton Village one. So
Yeah, and that was always
So-
my
There you go,
understanding
something like
growing
that,
up.
but
It
with
is
a
two separate.
hash line.
yeah, so that line's in the wrong spot though, Cheyenne. That red line.
Red line.
Yeah, that one should be to the left on that solid black line.
It
right
should be
there.
where
Right
that
here.
angle
Exactly,
is. Yes.
Okay, because I had told him, he gave me scenario one, and then Meredith had mentioned at the last meeting that she did not want the purple called out just because she thought it would be confusing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how the red line got brought
That's
up
okay.
more, maybe to I'm not really quite sure, but while he's working on the Brook Road, I'll have him work on the Milton Village as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so then basically it's scenario 2 without the red line. That's,
Yeah,
Yeah,
or scenario
that's-
one without the purple.
It's a scenario.
Look at
That,
which is
that
discussion we
line,
had
that
last
line is
week.
in the wrong place.
yeah, but the black line is
Is it?
correct.
Scenario one without the purple, I think, is easier to.
It's confusing, sorry. I see, you're reading from the file name, and I was looking at it on the title and the sheet, which doesn't
Oh.
exist. Yeah, all right.
Okay.
All right, so I think Cheyenne understands what needs to happen there, right?
She's
I'm
tracking.
sorry, I was confused. I
Yeah.
thought we were picking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was confused on the Brook Road parcel, but now that Nick's looking at that, so yeah, the whole thing is confusing. But
all right.
And
So,
if we're talking about Brook Road, and it's probably off topic, but that building is like very hazardous.
I think it's condemned.
Is
but
it condemned? And if it was condemned, shouldn't it be torn down?
I think there's a health department and building department question.
That
related
handles
to
that, okay.
Yeah. Because I saw where the health department condemned a building on Smith Road. And then I think it goes to the building department after that.
So can I ask a question on that Brook Road? Is 3, 5, and 9 coming out of that overlay?
That's the only place that the overlay applies.
all the Parkway stuff's coming out,
Oh,
and the
park-
gas station too.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
It's a shame to take the gas station out, but the wording doesn't include the gas station.
no. And this is something, again, where the board had discussed this larger district, but because there was someone who was actively interested at the time in number 5, to expedite it, it was selectively just those 3. The challenge is the minimum lot size requires you to have ownership of number 3. And that was sold to someone and they renovated it and lived there. So number 5 can't even apply. I mean, it's a map cleanup, but the zoning needs a cleanup.
And I still think that's great for MBTA zoning.
Let's do it. I mean, we can do whatever
Well, we didn't
want.
talk about the Blue Hills Parkway District this yet, but I do want to come back to it because this parcel, I agree with you, this corner should be looked at. There's 3 families right there.
Yeah,
But this is a cleanup
yeah.
of a map. I do think we should put a zoning amendment to this on the agenda.
And that's this is a good learning experience that whenever you do zoning, you have to attach a map.
Yeah, I mean, again, just going back to the idea that even Milton Village is written to be a planned unit development, that's because that's what this board and prior members were comfortable with. But MAPC at the time said, you really should just do a clean overlay. And I think that's what we're doing in Milton Village, East Milton Square now. And so I think going forward, we need to think about, I'm not sure the benefit of a PUD versus an overlay, and it might be that a PUD makes more sense like for something like this. But this requires the map. So it's a good conversation to think about down the road too. But
So did we have a consultant for this one, or was this just the board?
this was Tim coming to us, and I maybe Cheyenne recalls how it got brought to his attention, but he did describe it as an oversight previously and a cleanup that needed to happen.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just trying to think of our protocols on who writes our zoning. I know you're doing the heavy lifting on all of it, but eventually, should we have a consultant or a lawyer on retainer
That's
doing
why
it? If you ever step off the board, we're dead in the water, right? So it's great because it ensures you a spot on the board, which is awesome.
I think we
But
should hire a consultant, and there could be some residents who happen to be attorneys who might want to.
Yeah, but we have, which is,
hired.
I agree with that, but we should think about a protocol for every zoning article we do.
Well,
Because you
I
want
think
to
what
set
we-
up a
we
system
first-
that works.
I think we first need an overhaul of the zoning bylaw itself. It's a mess. And then once you get that cleaned up, then you can follow a structure. Right now,
Well, how do we know the zoning we would have to give the zoning bylaws to somebody to look at, right? We wouldn't do it.
no, we would, that's why I think we put in for 40,000 for,
Right.
basically, I think the person that we had in mind has a lot of experience writing them. I'm not sure if that person's an attorney or not.
Yeah, I don't think.
But a very experienced planner who writes zoning could do it.
I think the building department knows a guy also.
Yeah, and so I think, we were trying to hurry up and do these for the February town meeting. Ideally, it would have
No, I don't-
somebody to do it.
I think you did great, and I don't want to take any of that away from you. I'm just saying in the future, we should have a protocol in place so that one of us isn't around.
I'm sure.
Business keeps moving
Right.
because I'm not going to learn to do what you do. You're great at it, and I would never find the time. But I just think as we write zoning, we should be able to have our go-to lawyer or our go-to consultant look at it, edit it, or we just sit around and we come up with great ideas, give them an outline, he or she writes it.
Yeah,
That's just what I envisioned for a
Right.
board.
Ideally, this is a little bit off the topic here, but ideally we should have draft decisions, a template for a site plan
Yes.
approval, a template for a
Yes.
special
Sure.
permit, and be able to move through those and not require or not rely on the applicant's attorneys to do it for us. So that's something I've said that
Yeah.
in the past, but these are all things that take time for someone to develop. And so that can be a topic for another agenda.
Yeah, it's
I
cool.
see
That's why-
Sean packing up.
That's why the planning board needs a bigger budget.
Yeah. I'm just planting a
Or
seed, that's
planning
all.
department, so the planning department can hire someone to do it. All right, so we are just past 10. Sean's packing up, and adjourn is the next item on the agenda. So Sean, are you making a motion?
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
A second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Cheyenne, have a great trip and happy holidays.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where are you going?
Happy holidays. Oh, I'm going home to California.
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 Have fun.
All right,
you.
great. Otherwise, we'll see others next week.
Yes,
Thanks, bye.
thank you.